My daughter said she was just going to the corner store for milk and that she would be back in 20 minutes to pick up her two toddlers. But she never came back, leaving me to raise them on a factory foreman pension and a whole lot of prayer. And 15 years later, she returned, not with a hug or an apology, but with a lawyer, a limousine, and 3 police cruisers accusing me of kidnapping the very children she abandoned. But when I showed the envelope to the judge, he was stunned and asked, "Do they know about this?" And I replied, "Not yet, before I tell you how I destroyed their lives with a single piece of paper." Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from one of your own. My name is Luther Banks. I am 68 years old, and for the last 15 years I have been the father, mother, and grandfather to 2 children who were thrown away like yesterday trash. Jordan was 4 and Aaliyah was 2 when their mother, my daughter Tanisha, walked out that door and vanished into the night. She was chasing a high that I could not provide, and a man who promised her the world but gave her nothing but bruises. I remember the night she left, clearly, because it was the night my wife Etta cried until she fell asleep, holding little Aaliyah, who was asking for her mommy. Etta died 2 years later from a broken heart and overworked hands, leaving me alone to guide these kids through a world that is not kind to young black men and women without money. We made it work, though. We did not have much, but we had dignity. I retired early from the auto plant to be there when they got home from school. I learned to braid hair for Aaliyah, and I taught Jordan how to shave and how to look a man in the eye. When you shake his hand, we were a team, a unit forged in the fire of abandonment and cooled in the waters of unconditional love. And today was supposed to be our victory lap. It was a humid Saturday afternoon in June, the kind where the heat sticks to your shirt but the lemonade tastes like heaven. Aaliyah had just graduated from high school with honors, the first in our family to do so, and we were throwing a barbecue in the small backyard of the house I had owned since 1980. I looked around at the paper plates loaded with ribs and potato salad, at the neighbors dancing to old-school soul music, and at Jordan, who is 19 now and standing guard by the gate like he always did. Jordan had grew up too fast, taking on the role of protector before he could even tie his own shoes. He was watching the street, his eyes narrowed, and I walked over to him, clapping a hand on his broad shoulder. "Relax, son," I told him, handing him a soda. "She did it. Your sister is going to college." Jordan smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I have a bad feeling, Pops," he said quietly. I saw a black car pass by 3 times, slow like they were casing the joint. I told him it was probably just lost folks looking for the highway, but deep down, my stomach tightened, that old soldier instinct flaring up just a little. I turned my attention back to Aaliyah. She was laughing with her friends, her gown still on because she was too proud to take it off. I called everyone to attention, tapping my fork against my glass. Silence fell over the yard, and I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. "Aaliyah, baby girl," I said, my voice cracking just a bit. "Your grandma? Etta made me promise to give you this when you graduated. She bought this 30 years ago and hid it away. Even when we were broke, even when the lights got cut off, she never sold it." I opened the box to reveal a simple gold locket. Aaliyah gasped and ran to hug me, burying her face in my chest. "Thank you, Grandpa," she sobbed. "Thank you for everything." It was a perfect moment, the kind of moment you freeze in your mind to keep you warm when the cold winds blow. But the cold wind came sooner than I expected. It came with the wail of sirens cutting through the music and the laughter. First it was 1 cruiser, then 2, then 3. They screeched to a halt in front of my driveway, lights flashing red and blue against the siding of my house. The music died instantly. Neighbors backed away, whispering and pointing. Jordan stepped in front of me and Aaliyah, his fists clenched. But what froze my blood was not the police. It was the long, sleek black limousine that pulled up behind them. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, and out stepped a woman I had not seen in 15 years. But I would know those eyes anywhere. It was Tanisha, but not the Tanisha I knew. This woman was wearing a white designer suit that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and she was draped in diamonds. She looked like money, real money, the kind that does not apologize. She stepped onto the sidewalk and pointed a manicured finger straight at me, her face twisting into a mask of anguish that looked rehearsed. "Officer, that is him," she screamed. "That is the man who stole my babies. Arrest him immediately." Beside her stepped a man who looked like he owned the block. He was white, tall, with silver hair and a suit that screamed power. He walked with the arrogance of a man who has never been told no. in his life. This was Hunter, Tanisha. New husband, I assumed, though I had never met him. He whispered something to the police captain, a man named Miller, who had just transferred here last month and didn't know me from Adam. Miller nodded sharply and marched up my driveway, his hand resting on his holster. "Mr. Banks, put your hands where I can see them." Miller barked, ignoring the fact that I was holding a hugging teenager step away from the girl. I gently pushed Aaliyah behind me. "Stand down, Jordan," I ordered, my voice calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Officer, this is my granddaughter. We are celebrating her graduation. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Miller said, pulling out his handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest for custodial interference and kidnapping." "Kidnapping," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have raised these children for 15 years. I have court documents. Those documents are forged," Tanisha yelled, rushing past the police line to grab Aaliyah. "My baby. Oh my God, my baby. Mommy is here. I finally found you." Aaliyah looked terrified, backing away from this stranger who smelled like expensive perfume and lies. "Who are you?" Aaliyah asked, her voice trembling. Tanisha sobbed a loud theatrical sound that made the neighbors murmur. Surely this rich woman must be telling the truth. "Look at her. Look at him. They must have thought, I am your mother, baby. Your grandfather stole you from me. He told me you were dead. He kept you hidden all these years. It was a lie so big, so audacious that it took the air out of my lungs. I stepped forward to speak, to tell the truth about the crack pipe I found under her bed 15 years ago, about the empty bank account, about the note she left saying she could not handle the burden of kids. But before I could speak, 2 officers grabbed my arms and slammed me face first onto the hood of a patrol car. "Ouch, watch his shoulder," Jordan yelled, lunging forward. "Do not touch my grandfather." Hunter stepped in, then smooth as a snake. He put a hand on Jordan's chest and shoved him back with surprising strength. "Easy there, boy," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You do not want to add assaulting an officer to your family criminal record." Jordan looked at me, his eyes wild with rage and fear. I shook my head as best I could with my cheek pressed against the hot metal. "No, Jordan," I wheezed. "Do not fight them. Not here. Call Robert Stone. Call him now." The officers wrenched my arms behind my back and the metal cuffs bit into my wrists, clicking shut with a sound of finality. They hauled me up and I saw Tanisha trying to hug Aaliyah, who was stiff as a board, crying silently. Jordan was being held back by neighbors screaming that this was illegal, that they could not do this, but the police did not listen to the black teenager in the hoodie. They listened to the white man in the suit and the crying woman in diamonds. Hunter walked over to me as they shoved me toward the back of the cruiser. He leaned in close so only I could hear his cologne was overpowering, masking the scent of the barbecue smoke. "You did a good job, old man," he whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "They are healthy, well-mannered, and exactly what we need. Thanks for fattening them up for me now. Do yourself a favor and die in jail. It will be cheaper for everyone." He patted my cheek disrespectfully and stepped back, nodding to Officer Miller. "Take him away, Captain. He is dangerous." Miller shoved me into the back seat and slammed the door. I watched through the wire mesh as Tanisha steered a sobbing Aaliyah toward the limousine, and Hunter pointed at Jordan, gesturing for him to get in the car too. Jordan looked at me one last time and I nodded, telling him without words to go, to protect his sister, to survive, as the cruiser pulled away. I did not look back at my house or the ruined party. I looked at my hands bound in my lap and I felt a cold rage settling in my gut. They thought they had won because they had money and power. They thought I was just a helpless old man who would break under pressure. But they forgot one thing. I was a foreman. I knew how to build things, and I knew how to take them apart piece by piece. Tanisha had forgotten who raised her. She had forgotten that Luther Banks does not break, he waits. And while I waited in that cell, I was going to plan the most painful lesson my daughter would ever learn. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair, a smell I had not encountered since I bailed Tanisha out for shoplifting 20 years ago. I sat on the metal bench, my back straight, refusing to slump, refusing to look like the criminal they painted me to be. Hours passed before the heavy door clanked open and Officer Miller walked in, followed by Tanisha and a lawyer I did not recognize a man with a tablet and a sneer. They sat across from me at the metal table. The lawyer spread out a series of documents. "Mr. Banks," the lawyer began, his voice bored, "we are prepared to drop the kidnapping charges if you sign this voluntary relinquishment of parental rights and admit to creating a hostile environment that prevented my client from contacting her children." Tanisha refused to look me in the eye. She was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, acting the part of the traumatized victim perfectly. I looked at the papers, then at Tanisha. "Tell me, daughter," I said, my voice low and gravelly. "Did you tell them about the night you left? Did you tell them about the $300 you stole from your mother medicine jar? Did you tell them about the man named Rico you left with?" Tanisha slammed her phone down on the table. "Shut up," she hissed, her voice losing its polished accent and slipping back into the street rhythm she grew up with. "You always judging me, you old bat, you threw me out, you told me if I came back you would kill me. That is what I told the police, and that is what they believe, because look at you and look at me who looks like the stable parent now." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the small room. "So that is the game, you reinvented history because you found a sugar daddy." Hunter walked in. Then he did not need permission. He moved through the station like he owned it because, as I would later find out, he practically did. He was a major donor to the police benevolent fund. He stood behind Tanisha, chair, his hands on her shoulders, claiming his property. "Listen to me, Luther," Hunter said, his voice smooth but with an edge like a razor blade. "We are taking the kids regardless. You can do this the easy way. Sign the papers. Admit you were a bitter old man keeping a mother from her children. And you can go home to your sad little life, or you can fight us. Stay in this cell for months awaiting trial and lose everything. Anyway." I looked at Hunter, really looked at him, saw the greed in his eyes, the impatience. He did not care about Aaliyah or Jordan. He wanted something else. I did not know what it was yet, but I knew men like him. They never did anything out of the kindness of their hearts. "Why now?" I asked, ignoring the papers. "Why, after 15 years, did you suddenly decide you wanted to be a mother?" Tanisha looked at Hunter, checking for approval before answering. "We want to be a family again," she said unconvincingly. "We have a big house, a pool, cars. The kids deserve better than what you can give them. Look at you, Luther. You are poor, you are old, you cannot provide for them anymore." I leaned forward, the handcuffs clinking against the table. "I gave them love. I said something you know nothing about, and I will sit in this cell until my bones turn to dust before I sign my grandkids over to a stranger and a woman who abandoned them." Hunter sighed as if I was boring him. "Have it your way," he said. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. "Listen closely, old man. I am going to bury you. I am going to take your house, your pension, and your reputation. By the time I am done, the whole world will know you as a monster, and those kids, they will call me Dad within a month." He straightened up and signaled to the lawyer. "Let's go. Let him rot. Miller, take him back to lockup." Tanisha stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Enjoy prison, Daddy," she said with a smirk. "Do not worry about the kids. We will fix everything." You broke inside their heads. They walked out, leaving me alone in the silence. But they made a mistake. They thought they left a defeated man, but they left a man with nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. I closed my eyes and focused not on the fear, but on the plan. I needed Robert Stone. Robert was not just a lawyer, he was my platoon leader in Vietnam. We had crawled through mud together, and he owed me his life twice over. If anyone could get me out of here, it was Stone. I sat back and waited, counting the seconds, knowing that outside these walls, Tanisha and Hunter were moving into my house, touching my things, poisoning my grandkids, mines every minute. I sat here was a minute they gained ground, but I also knew something they didn't. I knew about the envelope hidden under the floorboards in the attic, an envelope that Tanisha thought she had destroyed 15 years ago, an envelope that proved everything. But first I had to survive the night in this cell, knowing my enemies were sleeping in my bed, eating my food, and lying to the children. I loved more than life itself. The war had started and the first battle was just beginning. The interrogation room was a concrete box designed to break men, but I had spent 30 years in a noisy factory, and I knew how to hold my ground against noise and intimidation. But what I was not prepared for was the silence of lies being accepted as truth. Officer Miller sat across from me, his eyes cold and uninterested, while Tanisha sat next to him, dabbing at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. Her lawyer, a man with a smile like a shark, spread a series of documents on the metal table as if he were laying out a royal flush. "These are the letters, Mr. Banks," the lawyer said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Dozens of them written by my client over the last 15 years, begging to see her children, pleading with you to let her just hear their voices." He pushed a stack of envelopes toward me. They looked old, the paper yellowed and crinkled as if they had been cried over. Tanisha let out a small choked sob, right on cue. I reached out with my handcuffed hands and picked up the top letter. The postmark was blurred, suspiciously smudged, but the handwriting was definitely hers. It was the same handwriting that had forged checks in my wife's name all those years ago. I looked at the content, reading phrases like, "I miss you, my babies, and Grandpa is so mean. He chased me away with a bat." I dropped the letter on the table as if it were burning my skin. "This is fiction," I said, my voice steady, despite the rage boiling in my gut. "She never wrote these, or if she did, she wrote them all yesterday. Look at the ink. It is fresh underneath the dirt." She rubbed on the paper. Officer Miller did not even look at the letter. He just looked at Tanisha with her designer suit and her expensive jewelry, and then he looked at me in my grease-stained t-shirt and worn-out work boots, and he made his choice. "We also have medical records." The lawyer continued, pulling out a file with a gold seal. "This is from Dr. Aris, a renowned psychiatrist. He treated my client for severe postpartum depression 15 years ago. His notes clearly state that she was vulnerable and that you, Mr. Banks, used physical intimidation to force her out of the home when she was at her weakest, taking advantage of a sick young mother to steal her children. It is a textbook case of custodial interference and emotional abuse." I slammed my fist on the table, startling Miller. "That is a lie," I roared, standing up until the chain on the handcuffs jerked me back. "She was not depressed, she was high. She stole $4,000 from my wife's medicine jar, money Etta had been saving for her surgery. She took the cash and hopped in a car with a dealer named Rico. I begged her to stay. I begged her to look at Aaliyah, who was crying in the crib. She laughed in my face and said she was free." Tanisha shrank back, pretending to be terrified. "See, Miller," she whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "See how violent he is? Imagine what he did to my poor babies when no one was looking." Miller stood up and shoved me back into my chair. "Sit down, Banks," he barked. "One more outburst, and I will throw you in solitary right now. We have documents. We have a victim, and we have you, a man with no custody papers and a history of aggression." According to these reports, I looked from Miller to the lawyer to Tanisha, and I realized the truth did not matter here in this room. Money was the only language being spoken, and I was broke. I was just an old black man who looked like he scraped by, while they looked like the pillars of the community. They had rewritten history, and they had the receipts to prove it. Receipts they probably bought this morning. The door opened, and a young man in a rumpled suit walked in, looking like he had not slept in a week. This was my court-appointed lawyer, a public defender named Mr. Henderson. He sat down next to me without even shaking my hand. He barely looked at the file. Miller slid over to him. He just rubbed his temples and sighed, the sigh of a man who had already given up. "Mr. Banks," he said, his voice flat, "I have reviewed the charges and the evidence presented by the victim's counsel. It does not look good. Kidnapping is a felony, and with the emotional distress enhancements they are adding, you are looking at 20 years, minimum." I looked at this boy who was supposed to defend my life. 20 years, I asked. "I will be dead in 10. I did not kidnap anyone. I raised them." Henderson waved his hand dismissively. "Listen to me. The court sees a biological mother with means and a stable home versus a grandfather with no legal standing. They have letters, medical records, and witnesses ready to testify to your hostility. The DA is offering a deal if you plead guilty to a lesser charge of custodial interference and surrender all rights to the children. Immediately you will get 5 years probation. No jail time. You can go home tonight." "Go home," I repeated. "Go home to an empty house while my grandkids are dragged off by strangers who only want them for some twisted game." "No, I will not sign that." Henderson looked at me. For the first time, really looked at me. "Mr. Banks, be reasonable. You cannot win this. Look at you. You are indigent. You have no resources fighting." This will destroy whatever life you have left. I straightened my spine, remembering who I was before the world decided I was nobody. I was the foreman of the Detroit assembly plant. Number 4, I managed 200 men. I ensured quality control for thousands of cars. I commanded respect because I earned it. I was not indigent. I was sacrificed. I had sold my boat, my tools, my stocks, and even my wife jewelry to pay for Jordan football camps and Aaliyah braces. I wore these rags so they could wear varsity jackets. I was not a bum. I was a king who had given away his crown to his heirs. I leaned in close to Henderson, my eyes locking onto his. "Listen to me, son," I said, my voice low and hard. "I do not want your deal, and I do not want your advice. I want you to make one phone call. Get me Robert Stone." Henderson let out a dry laugh. "Robert Stone, the civil rights attorney, the guy who sues cities and wins, he is $500 an hour. You cannot afford him." "He owes me," I said simply. "Call him. Tell him Sergeant Banks is calling in the debt from Da Nang. He will come." Henderson rolled his eyes, but he pulled out his phone. "Fine. I will call, but when he laughs and hangs up, you are signing this plea deal." He stepped out of the room, leaving me alone again, or so I thought. Door opened again, but it was not Henderson or Miller, it was Hunter. He walked in with that same arrogant stride, the air in the room, instantly smelling of expensive cologne and malice. He looked at the camera in the corner of the room, then looked at the guard outside the glass. The guard nodded and turned his back. Hunter reached up and tapped the lens of the camera, and the little red recording light flickered off. He had friends in high places. Indeed. He pulled out a chair and sat opposite me, not with the distance of an enemy but with the intimacy of a co-conspirator. He placed his manicured hands on the table and smiled, a smile that did not show his teeth. "Look at you, Luther," he said, shaking his head. "A tragic figure really holding on to the past, clinging to children who do not even belong to you. It is pathetic." I stared at him, my face a mask of stone. "What do you want?" "Hunter," I asked, "I know you do not want those kids. You looked at Jordan like he was a stain on your carpet." Hunter chuckled a low, wet sound, perceptive for a factory worker. "You are right. I do not particularly care for the boy. He is too much like you, stubborn, defiant. But the girl Aaliyah, she has potential, and more importantly, she is the key to something very lucrative for Tanisha and me, something you could never understand." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Here is the reality, old man. You are going to lose. Tanisha has the perfect story, and we have the perfect evidence. You are going to prison, and you are going to die, there alone and forgotten, unless we make a deal." "A deal?" I asked, skeptical sign over full, permanent guardianship of both children today. "Waive your right to a trial and admit you lied about Tanisha abandoning them. Do that, and I will make the charges disappear. I will even let you keep your little house." "And what else?" I asked, knowing there was a catch. "Because men like Hunter never made fair trades." Hunter's smile widened. "And there it is, the catch. In addition to the kids, you are going to liquidate your foreman pension fund, that little nest egg you have been hoarding. I know it is sitting there worth about $80,000. You are going to withdraw it and sign it over to Tanisha as restitution for her emotional suffering. Consider it back child support for the years you stole her babies." My blood ran cold. It was not enough to take my heart and my soul. They wanted to strip the meat from my bones, too. That pension was all I had left for my old age. It was what I planned to give Jordan for college. "You want my life savings?" I hissed. "You are a wealthy man. Why do you need my scraps?" Hunter stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Because it is not about the money, Luther. It is about breaking you. It is about taking everything you have ever loved or worked for and crushing it into dust. I want you to walk out of here with nothing but the clothes on your back, knowing you failed." He walked to the door and put his hand on the handle. "You have 24 hours. Luther, talk to your fancy lawyer. Friend, if he even shows up. But know this, if you do not sign by tomorrow morning, I will make sure Jordan ends up in the worst juvenile detention center in the state. And Aaliyah, well, let's just say, boarding school will be the least of her worries. Sign the papers, give us the money and the kids, and you get to live out your sad little life in peace. Refuse, and I will burn your world to the ground." He walked out, leaving me in the silence of the interrogation room. The red light on the camera flickered back on, blinking like a mocking eye. 24 hours to give up everything or lose everything. But Hunter had made a mistake. He thought he was negotiating with a desperate old man. He did not know he was threatening a soldier who had just been given a target. While I sat on the cold steel bench of my holding cell, counting the cracks in the ceiling tiles, my home was being turned into a war zone. Jordan told me later that the invasion began less than an hour after they hauled me away. Tanisha did not waste a second. She called a locksmith before the police lights had even faded from the street, and by the time she pulled up in her limousine, a man in blue coveralls was drilling out the deadbolt I had installed with my own hands 20 years ago. That lock was meant to keep thieves out, but now it was letting the worst kind of thief right in the front door. Tanisha stepped across the threshold of the home she had abandoned and wrinkled her nose as if she had stepped in something foul. "God, it smells like old people and cabbage in here," she announced, her voice echoing in the small entryway. She did not see the love in the worn carpet or the history in the faded wallpaper. She only saw dirt. She only saw value in things that shined, and my house was built on sweat and wood, not glitter and gold. She walked straight to the mantel where I kept a collection of porcelain angels, the ones she had dusted every Sunday for 30 years without a second thought. Tanisha swept her arm across the shelf, sending them crashing to the floor. "Get a trash bag," she ordered the maid she had brought with her. "Get rid of all this junk. I want this place sanitized before I sleep here." Aaliyah stood in the corner, clutching her graduation gown, watching her mother destroy her grandmother memory. But Tanisha was a master of distraction. She snapped her fingers and the chauffeur brought in stacks of boxes wrapped in silver paper. "Look, baby," Tanisha cooed, ignoring the broken porcelain at her feet. "I know it is a hard day, so Mommy brought you a few things to make you feel better." She tore open a box to reveal a designer handbag worth more than my monthly pension. Then another with Italian leather boots, then a silk dress. Aaliyah had never owned anything that wasn't bought on sale or hand-sewn by me. She looked at the gifts, then at her mother, and for the first time I think the glitter blinded her. She touched the leather, and Tanisha smiled, a predator, seeing the trap snap shut. "You deserve the best, Aaliyah," Tanisha whispered. "Your grandfather kept you in rags, but I am going to dress you like a queen." While Aaliyah was being suffocated by silk and lies. Hunter was outside working on Jordan. My grandson stood on the porch watching the locksmith finish the job. His arms crossed over his chest, his eyes hard. He was not like his sister. He remembered too much. He remembered the night Tanisha left. He remembered the hunger before I took over. He was not going to be bought with a handbag. But Hunter knew that men like Hunter speak a different language with boys. They speak in horsepower and chrome. A flatbed truck pulled up to the curb carrying a brand new sports car. A bright red machine that looked fast, just sitting still. It was aggressive, loud, and expensive. Everything Jordan wasn't, but everything a 19-year-old boy secretly wants to be. Hunter walked up the driveway dangling a set of keys. "Hey, sport," he said, his voice casual like he was talking to an old friend. "I know you and I got off on the wrong foot. I was just protecting your mom. Tensions were high, you understand." Jordan did not answer. He just stared at the car. Hunter tossed the keys and Jordan caught them, instinctively, pure reflex. "It is yours," Hunter said, lighting a cigarette and blowing the smoke toward my rose bushes. "No strings attached. Consider it a signing bonus for joining Team Winning. Look, I know you love the old man, but be real. He held you back. You should be driving this, not riding the bus. You should be in a top-tier university, not looking at community college. Take the car. Jordan, you earned it just for surviving this long in this dump." Jordan looked at the keys in his hand, the metal cool against his palm. He looked at the car, then back at Hunter. He did not smile. He did not say thank you. He just pocketed the keys and turned back to the house. Hunter smirked, thinking he had bought my grandson loyalty, but he did not know. Jordan took the keys, not because he was bought, but because he needed a getaway vehicle. Inside the house, the air was thick with the poison. Tanisha was dripping into Aaliyah's ear. They were in the kitchen, my kitchen where I had taught Aaliyah to make biscuits from scratch. Tanisha was leaning against the counter holding a glass of wine she had brought with her because my tap water was not good enough for her. "I sent money," Aaliyah Tanisha was saying, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "every single month for 15 years, thousands of dollars. I wanted you to go to private school. I wanted you to have dance lessons, ballet camps, everything." Aaliyah looked up, her eyes wide and confused, but Grandpa said, "You never called. Grandpa said we were broke. We ate oatmeal for dinner sometimes. Tanisha let out a sharp, cruel laugh. Of course. He said that, sweetie, he drank it all. Luther has always had a problem with the bottle. He took my money, the money meant for you, and he poured it down his throat. Why do you think he drives that old truck? Why do you think this house is falling apart? Because he is a selfish old drunk who stole your childhood. It was a lie so bold it took my breath away. Even from miles away in a jail cell. I never touched a drop of liquor, not since the day Etta died, and I promised her I would keep a clear head for the kids. But Aaliyah did not know my bank accounts. She only knew the struggle. She knew the nights we turned the heat down to save money. She knew the thrift store clothes Tanisha planted a seed of doubt that was growing into a tree of resentment right before her eyes. Oh, baby, Tanisha said, pulling Aaliyah into a hug. He lied to us both. He kept my letters, and he spent your money. But do not worry. Mommy is here now, and I am never letting you go again. Jordan watched this from the hallway, his hand clenching the car keys in his pocket. He knew it was a lie. He knew I scrimped and saved every penny, but he also knew that speaking up now would get him thrown out, and he needed to stay close to protect his sister. So he stayed silent, swallowing his bile, watching the invaders rewrite our history. But silence did not mean inaction. Jordan waited until night fell, until the house was quiet and the intruders had retreated to their corners. Tanisha took Aaliyah's room, forcing my granddaughter to sleep on the couch, while Hunter claimed the master bedroom, my bedroom. The thought of that man sleeping in the bed I shared with Etta made my blood boil, but Jordan told me what he found there, and it was worth the violation. Jordan crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking in the familiar pattern he had memorized as a child. He pushed open the door to my room. Just a crack. The air inside was heavy with the smell of stale tobacco smoke Hunter had been smoking in the house, violating the one rule I held sacred for the health of the kids. Hunter was not in the bed. He was in the bathroom, the shower running. Jordan slipped inside, his heart hammering against his ribs. He did not know what he was looking for, but he knew men like Hunter always left a trail. He saw a pile of clothes thrown carelessly on my rocking chair, the chair Etta used to nurse Tanisha in. He saw a gold money clip on the dresser next to a half-empty pack of expensive cigarettes. He moved to the nightstand where Hunter had dumped the contents of his pockets. There were receipts, a lighter and a crumpled piece of paper that looked like it had been retrieved from the trash. Jordan smoothed it out, his hands shaking in the moonlight coming through the window. It was an architectural drawing, a blueprint of a massive structure, steel and glass, cold and imposing. But what stopped Jordan's heart was not the building, it was the location mapped out at the bottom right corner. The map showed our neighborhood, our street, our block, but the houses were gone. My house, Mrs. Johnson House, the community garden, all gone, replaced by a sprawling complex labeled Hunter Plaza, mixed-use commercial and residential development. Proposed site demolition scheduled. August 1st. Jordan stared at the date. August 1st was 3 weeks away. They were not here to be a family. They were not here for custody or love or reconciliation. They were here to bulldoze our lives, quite literally. Hunter needed the deed. To my house. He needed me out of the way so he could level the block and build his monument to greed. That was why he offered the money. That was why he called the police. That was why he framed me for kidnapping. He needed the title holder gone and he needed the heirs compliant. Suddenly, the bathroom water stopped. Jordan shoved the paper into his pocket and scrambled backward, slipping out of the room just as the bathroom door handle turned. He leaned against the wall in the hallway, breathing hard. Clutching the piece of paper like a lifeline, he finally understood the scope of the war we were in. This was not just a custody battle. This was an eviction notice written in blood. Jordan looked at the closed door of his sister's makeshift bedroom, then at the master bedroom where the enemy slept, and he realized that the sports car in the driveway was not a gift. It was a bribe to keep him quiet while they destroyed his home, but they had underestimated him, just like they underestimated me. Jordan pulled out the burner phone I had hidden for him under the floorboards, a secret communication line for emergencies only, and he typed a message, his thumbs flying in the dark. Pops, they are not keeping the house. They are tearing it down. I have the plans. Call Stone now. He hit send and waited in the dark, the red light of the phone screen illuminating his face, the face of a boy who had just become a man in the span of a single terrifying night. The invaders were sleeping soundly, thinking they had won, thinking the old man was rotting in jail, and the kids were pacified with toys, but with They did not know that inside the walls of the house they planned to destroy, the resistance had just begun. The sound of the heavy steel latch sliding open was the sweetest music I had heard in 24 hours. Officer Miller stood aside, his face sour, as if letting me go was a personal insult. He handed me a plastic bag containing my belt, my wallet, and my watch. "Get out of here, Banks," he grunted. "Do not make me bring you back." I did not give him the satisfaction of a response. I just took my things and walked out into the humid night air where Robert Stone was waiting, leaning against the hood of his silver sedan like a bulldog in a three-piece suit. Robert was the only man I knew who could wear a suit that cost $1,000 and still look like he was ready for a fistfight. We had served together in the jungle, and 40 years later he was still saving my hide. He did not hug me. Men like us did not need to perform affection. Instead, he handed me a cup of black coffee and opened the passenger door. "Get in, Luther," he said, his voice rough like gravel in a mixer. "We have work to do, and not a lot of time to do it." As we drove away from the precinct, Robert threw a thick manila folder into my lap. "Start reading," he ordered. I flipped it open under the passing streetlights, expecting to see legal briefs about custody laws. But what I saw were financial statements, confusing webs of shell companies, and foreclosure notices. "This is Hunter dossier," Robert explained, keeping his eyes on the road. "Your new son-in-law is not a tycoon. Luther, he is a con artist running a shell game that is about to collapse." I scanned the pages, my eyes widening. Hunter Real Estate Holdings was listed as the defendant in 3 different lawsuits. For non-payment contractors were suing him, banks were chasing him, and the IRS had a lien on his personal property. "He is broke," I whispered, looking at a bank statement with a negative balance that had more zeros than I had ever seen. Robert nodded grimly. "He is worse than broke. He is drowning. He has been moving money from one project to pay the interest on another for years. It is a classic Ponzi scheme, but he has run out of new investors. That is why he needs the mall project." I realized the pieces falling into place, the rush, the aggression, the desperation he needs to break ground on Hunter Plaza to unlock the next tranche of bank financing. Robert hit the steering wheel with his palm. "Exactly, the bank will not release the construction loan until he owns 100% of the land on that block. He has bought out everyone else. Your neighbors sold weeks ago. But you are the holdout. He needs your deed. Luther, and he needs it by the end of the month. Or his house of cards comes down and he goes to federal prison for fraud." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This was not about Tanisha missing her babies. This was not about family reunification. This was a liquidation sale. Hunter looked at my grandkids and saw leverage. He looked at my home and saw collateral. He was willing to destroy 3 lives just to keep his checkbook balanced for another month. Drive faster. "Robert," I said, my hand crushing the coffee cup. "I need to get to my house before that vulture tears it apart. We pulled onto my street 20 minutes later, but the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. A private security cruiser was parked perpendicular to my driveway. Blocking access, a uniformed guard stood by my front gate, arms crossed, looking like a nightclub bouncer keeping the riffraff out. Robert stopped the car and I jumped out, marching toward my front door, ready to tear it off the hinges if I had to. But the guard stepped in my path, his hand resting on a taser. "Mr. Banks," he said, reading my name off a clipboard. "I have a court order here, restraining you from entering the premises or coming within 100 yards of the protected persons Tanisha Banks and her children." "Protected persons," I roared, stepping into the guard personal space. "This is my house, those are my children." The guard did not flinch. He just held up a piece of paper stamped by a judge ex parte emergency. "Protective order," he recited. "Granted this afternoon based on the credible threat of violence you pose. Step back, sir, or you will be in violation and I will detain you until the police arrive." I reached for my keys, ignoring him, and shoved past toward the door. I jammed my key into the lock, expecting the familiar click, but the metal stopped halfway. They had changed the tumblers in less than a day. They had erased my access to 40 years of my life. I pounded on the wood, the sound echoing in the night. "Jordan. Aaliyah. It is Grandpa. Open the door," I shouted, but the house remained silent, dark and imposing, like a fortress occupied by enemy forces. Robert grabbed my shoulder, pulling me back before the guard could deploy his taser. "Luther, stop," he hissed in my ear. "This is what they want. They want you to lose control." They want you to assault this guard so they can revoke your bail and lock you up for good. You cannot fight this with your fists. Tonight, we have to fight it with the law, come on." I looked at the upstairs window where Aaliyah used to sleep, and I saw the curtain twitch just a fraction. Someone was watching, but they were not coming to save me. I let Robert pull me back to the street, my chest heaving with unspent rage. "I cannot leave them, Robert," I said, my voice breaking. "I cannot leave them in there with him." Robert pointed down the street to where my old Ford F-150 was parked by the curb, looking battered and rusty under the streetlight. "Then, do not leave," he said. "Sleep in the truck. Stay on public property. Keep your distance, but keep your eyes open. I will go to the judge first thing in the morning and try to get this order quashed. But for tonight, you are a squatter in your own neighborhood." I walked to my truck, my legs feeling heavy as lead. I climbed into the cab. The smell of old grease, stale coffee, and hard work wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. This truck had hauled the lumber to build my deck. It had carried Aaliyah to her first dance recital. It had taken Jordan to football practice. It was more of a home than the building down the street was right now. I reclined the seat back, trying to find a position that would not cripple my 68-year-old back, and I settled in for the longest night of my life. I sat in the darkness of the truck cab for hours, my eyes burning from exhaustion but refusing to close. I had a pair of binoculars in the glove compartment, old military surplus that I used for birdwatching with Aaliyah when she was small. I pulled them out and trained them on the living room window of my house. The curtains were sheer, and with the lights on inside, I could see everything like a silent movie playing out on a screen I could not touch. What I saw made my stomach turn. Tanisha was in the living room, but she was not comforting her children, who had just been ripped from their grandfather. She was not cooking them a meal or reading them a story. She had set up a ring light, the kind influencers use, and she was positioning Aaliyah and Jordan on the couch like props. Aaliyah looked miserable, her eyes puffy and red. Jordan sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, staring at the floor, refusing to look at the camera. Tanisha was checking her reflection in her phone, fixing her hair, adjusting her diamond necklace. Then she signaled them. She said something, probably a command to smile, because Aaliyah forced a weak, trembling grin. Tanisha threw her arms around them, pulling them into a tight embrace that looked more like a chokehold. She snapped photo after photo, changing her expression from tragic mother to relieved savior in seconds. Click pout, click smile, click look lovingly at the daughter. "You abandoned?" I watched her type furiously on her phone, probably posting the pictures to social media, crafting a caption about her miraculous reunion and the evil grandfather who kept them apart. Once she hit send, her demeanor changed instantly. She pushed Aaliyah away, almost shoving her off the couch, and stood up, ignoring them completely. She walked to the sideboard and poured herself a large glass of wine, downing half of it in one gulp. She did not speak to them again. She just walked out of the room, leaving them sitting there like discarded toys. The rage I felt was a cold, hard thing sitting in my chest, displacing the grief. Seeing my grandkids treated like props in her vanity play was worse than seeing them cry. At least tears were honest. This was a performance, a calculated manipulation to win the court of public opinion while destroying their souls. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes. The image of Tanisha, cold indifference burning into my retinas. Memory washed over me, pulling me back 15 years to a night much like this one. But inside that house, Etta was lying in our bed, her skin paper-thin, her breathing shallow. The cancer had taken almost everything from her, but it had not taken her sight or her wisdom. She had grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a dying woman, and she had pulled me close, Luther, she had whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Promise me. Promise you." "What, baby?" I had asked, choking back tears. "Promise me you will not let her back in," she wheezed, referring to Tanisha, who had been gone for 2 years. "By then she is broken, Luther, and she breaks everything she touches. If she comes back, it will not be for love. She does not know how to love. She will come back when she smells money or when she needs something. Do not let her hurt these babies. Promise me you will be their shield." I had promised her, kissing her forehead as she took her last breaths. I swore I would protect them with my life, and for 15 years I thought I had kept that promise. I thought the danger was drugs or the streets, or bad grades. I never imagined the danger would come, wearing a designer suit and driving a limousine. I looked back at the house, dark now except for the porch light watching over an empty yard. "I failed you, Etta," I whispered to the empty truck cab. I let the wolf right in the front door, and now she has the keys. But as I sat there shivering in the night air, watching the house that I built with my own hands, I felt a shift inside me. Tanisha and Hunter thought they had won because they had the house and the kids, but they forgot that I knew every creak in those floorboards. I knew every secret that house held, and more importantly, I knew exactly who Tanisha was beneath the diamonds and the lies. She was still the scared, selfish girl who ran away when things got hard, and I was going to make things very, very hard for her starting tomorrow. I woke up to the sound of a nightmare unfolding right outside my windshield. My neck was stiff from sleeping upright in the driver's seat of my old Ford, and the taste of stale coffee and regret coated my tongue. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the sight that greeted me through the morning mist. My quiet suburban street. The street where I had taught Jordan to ride a bike, and where I had walked Aaliyah to the bus stop for a decade had been transformed into a circus of cruelty. News vans were parked on the lawns of my neighbors, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like accusing fingers. Reporters were setting up tripods and checking their microphones. And in the center of it all, standing on my front porch like a queen, addressing her subjects, was Tanisha. She had undergone a miraculous transformation overnight. Gone were the diamonds and the white designer suit that screamed wealth and arrogance in their place. She wore a modest pastel dress and a simple cardigan, looking every inch the grieving, humble mother who had been wronged. She held a tissue in her hand, twisting it nervously, a perfect prop for the performance she was about to give Hunter. Stood in the shadows of the doorway, dressed in a sweater and slacks, looking like the supportive partner holding the family together, while his wife fell apart. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I had a front row seat. From 50 yards away. I watched as a reporter from the local news station raised her hand and the camera started rolling. Tanisha stepped forward, her shoulders slumped, her voice trembling just loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "I just want to thank everyone for their support," she began, wiping a tear that I knew she had summoned on command for 15 years. "I have lived in a personal hell, knowing my babies were out there somewhere, wondering why their mommy didn't come for them." She paused for effect, letting the lie sink into the hearts of the housewives and retirees gathered on the sidewalk. "My father," she continued, her voice hardening slightly, "he is a monster. He told me, if I ever came back, he would hurt them. He told me the law was on his side because he had friends in the system. I was young, I was scared, and I had no money, so I ran, but I never stopped looking for them. And now that I have found them, he is trying to terrorize us again, claiming I abandoned them when he was the one who ripped them from my arms." The crowd murmured. In sympathy and outrage, I saw Mrs. Gable from down the street shaking her head, looking at my house with pity. She had known me for years. She had eaten my barbecue. She had praised my parenting. But in the face of this tearful mother, her loyalty evaporated like water on hot pavement. Tanisha was rewriting history, turning my sacrifice into a crime and her abandonment into a tragedy. She painted herself as the victim of a tyrannical father, and the world was eating it up with a spoon. Then the mood shifted. Someone in the crowd, a young man I did not recognize, pointed at my truck. "Look," he shouted. "That is him! That is the kidnapper!" Heads turned, and suddenly, I was not just an observer. I was the target. A wave of anger rolled off the crowd, palpable and hot. People started moving toward the truck, shouting insults, calling me sick, calling me an abuser. I sat stone still, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I did not start the engine. I did not roll up the window. I just stared straight ahead, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Splat an egg, hit the windshield, bursting into a yellow star right in front of my face. Then another hitting the door. Then a balloon filled with red paint exploded against the side window, dripping down the glass like blood. "Get out of here, you old creep!" someone yelled. "You belong in jail!" shouted another. I felt the truck rock as someone kicked the bumper, but I did not move. I accepted their rage, not because I deserved it, but because running away would look like an admission of guilt. I sat there like a statue while my neighbors and strangers vandalized the only thing of value I had left outside that house. Tanisha watched from the porch, and for a split second amidst her fake sobs, I saw a smirk curl the corner of her lips. She was enjoying this. She was feeding me to the wolves and watching them tear me apart. The crowd eventually pulled back when the cameras turned toward the door again. Evidently, the main event was not over. Tanisha turned and beckoned to someone inside the house, and my heart stopped. Aaliyah stepped out into the sunlight. She looked nothing like the girl who had graduated 2 days ago. Her hair, usually worn in natural braids, was straightened and pulled back severely. She was wearing a dress that looked too young for her, something a child would wear, making her look smaller, more vulnerable. She walked with her head down, her shoulders hunched as if she were carrying the weight of the world. Tanisha put a protective arm around her, guiding her to the microphone like a lamb to the slaughter. "Speak up, sweetie," Tanisha urged, loudly enough for the cameras. "Tell the world how happy you are to be home." Aaliyah looked up and her eyes met mine through the paint-stained glass of the truck distance, and shame separated us. But I saw the terror in her gaze. She looked at the reporters, then at Hunter, who was standing just behind the doorframe, out of sight of the cameras, but clearly visible to her. I saw him tap his wrist. A silent reminder of some threat he had made. Aaliyah took a shaky breath and leaned toward the microphone. "I just want to say," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, "that I am happy to be with my mom. I missed her." The reporter thrust the mic closer, asking leading questions. "Did your grandfather keep you from her? Aaliyah, did he tell you she didn't love you?" Aaliyah? Eyes darted around, looking for an escape, looking for Jordan, looking for me. But there was no escape. "Yes," she said, the word falling from her mouth like a stone. "Grandpa was very strict. He told us Mom was bad. He said we could never leave." I choked back a sob, watching my baby girl destroy my reputation to save herself. I knew she did not mean it. I knew she was reading a script written by fear, but it still felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I was strict about homework. I was strict about curfew, but I was never strict about love. I told them their mother was sick. I told them she had lost her way. I never demonized her the way she was demonizing me now. The reporter pressed on, asking for details about the abuse implied by Tanisha. Aaliyah hesitated. Tears, real tears now, filling her eyes. He did not understand us," she cried. "He is old, and he gets confused. Sometimes I just want to be with my family. Please leave us alone." She turned and buried her face in Tanisha's shoulder, and the crowd let out a collective awe of heartbreak. Tanisha hugged her, rocking her back and forth, looking directly at the camera with eyes that promised vengeance. "See," Tanisha said, her voice vibrating with righteous indignation. "This is what he did. He brainwashed them. But we are going to undo the damage. We are going to heal as a family, and no one is going to separate us again. Thank you all for respecting our privacy during this difficult time." She turned and ushered Aaliyah back inside, closing the heavy oak door with a finality that echoed in my soul. The show was over, the narrative was set. I was the villain and she was the hero, and Aaliyah was the prize. The reporters began to pack up, satisfied with their story. The crowd started to disperse, casting last angry glances at my truck. I sat there, the smell of drying paint and raw eggs seeping through the vents, feeling older and more tired than I had ever felt in my life. I had lost the court of public opinion. I had lost access to my home, and now I had watched my granddaughter turn against me on live television. It was a total defeat, calculated and executed with military precision. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was the burner phone, the one only Jordan and Robert knew about. I pulled it out, hoping for a message from Jordan telling me he was okay, telling me he was fighting back, but the number on the screen was unfamiliar. A blocked ID. I hesitated, then opened the message. The text was short, brutal, and signed with a single letter T. It read, "Do you see? Now, old man, nobody cares about the truth. They care about the story. I own the story. Now look at your granddaughter. She knows. Who holds the power? Give up. Sign the papers. Give us the house in full custody by tonight, or the next interview won't be so gentle. I will make her tell them you touched her. I will make her hate you so much she will want to spit on your grave. Your choice." T. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. This was not just a threat, it was nuclear war. Tanisha was willing to accuse her own father of the vilest crime imaginable just to get a piece of land she was willing to destroy. Aaliyah's soul, forcing her to lie about something that would scar her forever, just to win. I looked at the message again, reading the words until they blurred. I realized then that there was no bottom to their depravity. There was no line they would not cross to Hunter and Tanisha. People were just chess pieces to be moved or sacrificed to get what they wanted. They thought this text would break me. They thought the threat of being branded a monster would send me running to sign their papers, and maybe a younger man or a weaker man would have folded. Maybe a man who cared about his reputation more than his duty would have given up. But they forgot who they were dealing with. I looked up at the house where the curtains were drawn tight, hiding the rot inside. They thought they had isolated me. They thought they had stripped me of my armor, but all they had done was strip away my mercy. I put the truck in gear, the engine roaring to life with a rumble that sounded like a growl. I was not going to sign anything. I was not going to run. I was going to fight fire with fire. I drove away from the curb, the dried paint flaking off in the wind. I headed toward the city, toward Robert office, toward the only weapon I had left. Tanisha wanted a war of stories. Well, I had a story too. A story buried in a yellow envelope hidden beneath the floorboards of a house she claimed was hers. A story that did not rely on tears or acting but on cold, hard ink, and a signature she thought had been burned 15 years ago she wanted to make Aaliyah hate me. She was about to find out that hate works both ways, and the truth, when it finally comes out, cuts deeper than any lie ever could. The restaurant Hunter chose for our little summit was called the Obsidian, a place where a glass of water cost more than my hourly wage back at the plant, and the lighting was so dim you could barely read the menu, which was fine by me because I had no intention of eating anything this man paid for. I walked in, wearing my best Sunday suit, the only one I had managed to grab before the police threw me out of my own house. It was 10 years old and smelled slightly of mothballs, but I held my head high as the hostess looked me up and down with a mixture of confusion and disdain. She clearly wanted to tell me I was in the wrong place, but when I mentioned Hunter, her attitude shifted to terrified obedience. "Mr. Hunter is expecting you at table 4, she squeaked, pointing toward a secluded booth in the back. I walked through the dining room feeling the eyes of the city elite boring into my back. They saw an old black man with calloused hands and gray hair, and they probably thought I was the help or a charity case. I did not care what they thought. My focus was entirely on the man sitting in the leather booth swirling a glass of amber liquid that looked expensive and deadly. Hunter did not stand up when I approached. He did not offer his hand. He just gestured to the empty seat opposite him with a flick of his wrist like he was shooing away a fly. "Sit down, Luther," he said, his voice slurring, just the tiniest bit. He had started drinking early, probably to drown out the noise of his collapsing empire. I sat down, keeping my back straight, refusing to sink into the plush leather. The table was empty except for a bottle of scotch, 2 glasses, and a sleek silver briefcase that sat between us like a landmine. Hunter poured a generous amount of liquor into the second glass and slid it toward me. "Drink up," he said with a sneer. "It is 50 years older than your daughter, and infinitely more valuable." I pushed the glass away. "I am not here to drink with you, Hunter," I said, my voice low and steady. "Tell me why you called me here, or I am walking out." Hunter laughed, a harsh barking sound that made a couple at the next table look over in alarm. "You are here because I am a generous man, Luther," he said, leaning forward, the alcohol fumes wafting across the table despite everything you have done. "Despite the kidnapping and the lies and the damage to my reputation, I am willing to offer you a lifeline." He placed his hand on the silver briefcase and clicked the latches open with a dramatic flair. He spun it around so I could see inside. It was packed with stacks of $100 bills, crisp and neat, wrapped in bank bands. $50,000, Hunter whispered, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "Tax-free, untraceable. Cash. Take it, Luther. Take it and get in your old truck and drive until you hit the ocean. Start over, somewhere else. Buy a little shack in Florida. Live out your days in the sun. Consider it a retirement gift, a severance package for a job poorly done." I looked at the money and then I looked at Hunter. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip, the slight tremor in his hand as he held the briefcase lid open. He was desperate. He was trying to buy me off with the last of his liquidity, hoping I was just a greedy old man who would take the bait. $50,000 was a lot of money to some people. It was a fortune to me right now, homeless and disgraced, but I knew what that money represented. It was the price of my soul. It was the price of Aaliyah and Jordan future. "This is charity," Hunter continued, trying to sound magnanimous. "I know you are broke. I know your lawyer is working pro bono, but that won't last. You cannot win against me in court, Luther. I have resources. I have connections. You have nothing. This is me being the bigger man. Take the money, sign the custody papers. I have right here in my jacket, and disappear. Everyone wins you. Get to retire. Tanisha gets her babies, and I get my project." He pulled a folded document from his inside pocket and laid it next to the money. A pen rolled across the table, stopping against my hand. "Sign. It," he urged, his voice tightening. "Just sign it and walk away." Rich, or do not sign it and walk away with nothing but a prison sentence. The choice is yours, old man. I looked at the money one last time. Then I reached out and closed the briefcase with a soft snap. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet restaurant. Hunter blinked, surprised. "You are refusing?" he asked, his voice rising an octave. "You are refusing $50,000. Are you senile? Do you not understand what is happening here?" "I understand perfectly," I said, leaning in until I was inches from his face. "I understand that $50,000 is nothing compared to the millions you stand to lose if that mall project does not break ground on August 1st. I understand that you are not offering me this money because you are generous. You are offering it because you are terrified. You are bleeding cash. Hunter, your contractors are suing you, your investors are pulling out, and you need my deed to stop the bleeding." Hunter's face went pale, his arrogance faltering for a split second. "How do you—" he started, but I cut him off. "I know a lot of things, Hunter," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "For example, I know about St. Mary Academy in Zurich." The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. "St. Mary Academy," he whispered, the glass of scotch trembling in his hand. "How do you know that name?" "I know because you are sloppy," I continued. "I know because you think people like me, people who clean floors and serve tables and drive trucks, are invisible, but we see everything. Hunter, my friend works at the travel agency where you booked the one-way ticket for Aaliyah. My other friend cleans the offices at the consulate where you applied for her student visa. I know exactly what your plan is. You do not want to be a father to that girl. You want to ship her off to a boarding school in Switzerland. The moment the judge signs that custody order, you want to exile her to a cold mountain halfway across the world so you never have to look at her again." Hunter's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked around the restaurant, paranoid now, wondering who else was watching him, who else was feeding me information. "You were planning to separate siblings," I hissed, letting my anger surface. "You were going to keep Jordan here as free labor, probably working construction on your site, and send Aaliyah away to be forgotten. You call that family, you call that love." "It is a top-tier school," Hunter stammered, trying to regain his footing. "It is an opportunity for her. She would be getting a world-class education, something you could never provide in your little shack. Do not act like I am the villain here. I am giving her a future. You are giving her a prison sentence." I shot back. "You are sending her away because she reminds Tanisha of her failure, and she reminds you of a responsibility you do not want. You want the land, not the children. Admit it, Hunter. You are not doing this for Tanisha. You are doing this because without my land, your company goes bankrupt and you go to jail for fraud." Hunter's face turned a mottled shade of red, the vein in his forehead pulsing dangerously. He slammed his fist onto the table, causing the silverware to jump and the scotch glass to tip over, spilling amber liquid all over the white tablecloth and the expensive briefcase. "Damn it!" he shouted, drawing the attention of the entire room. "Shut your mouth, old man. You do not know who you are dealing with." I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound harsh and final. "I know exactly who I am dealing with," I said, my voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "I am dealing with a thief and a coward. I am dealing with a man who would sell a teenage girl into exile just to save his own skin." I picked up the soaking wet document he had wanted me to sign and tore it in half, dropping the pieces onto the spilled liquor. "I am not selling my grandchildren. Hunter, not for 50,000, not for 50 million. Keep your blood money. You are going to need it for your legal defense." Hunter scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild with rage and alcohol. He lunged across the table, grabbing my lapels, pulling me close, his breath hot and reeking of scotch. "You are making a mistake, Luther," he snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You think you have won because you know my plan. You think a few rumors will stop me. I will destroy you. I will grind you into dust. I will make sure you die in a cell. And while you are rotting there, I will tear down your house brick by brick and build my empire on top of your memories." I looked down at his hands, clutching my cheap suit, hands that had never done a day of honest work in their lives. Hands that were shaking with fear, masked as anger. "Unhand me," I said quietly, but with the authority of a man who had led soldiers through hell. "Unhand me, or I will finish what we started in this booth right now." Hunter hesitated, looking into my eyes and seeing something there that terrified him. He saw the resolve of a grandfather protecting his own. He released me, shoving me back and straightening his ruined jacket. "You will regret this," he spat, wiping his mouth. "You had a chance to walk away with dignity, now you are going to walk away with nothing." I fixed my tie and looked at him with pity. "Dignity is not something you can buy in a briefcase, Hunter, and it is not something you can sell. I am walking out of here with my soul intact, which is more than I can say for you." I turned and walked toward the exit, my heart pounding against my ribs, but my steps steady. I heard Hunter shouting behind me, cursing, throwing the glass against the wall, but I did not look back. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving the devil and his money behind me. The war was far from over. In fact, it had just escalated to a level I never imagined, but now I knew his endgame, I knew he was vulnerable, and more importantly, I knew he was scared. And a scared man makes mistakes I was going to use to bury him. The chain-link fence that separated my backyard from the alleyway used to be just a boundary line, but now it felt like the iron bars of a cage, except I was on the outside looking in at the life I had built. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn where Aaliyah used to practice her cheerleading routines. I stood in the shadows of the neighbor garage, my hood pulled up, trying to catch a glimpse of my granddaughter, hoping to see some sign that the girl I raised was still in there somewhere. But what I saw broke me more than the handcuffs or the jail cell. Tanisha was sitting on the porch swing, the same swing where Etta used to read Bible stories to the kids. She had her arm around Aaliyah, who looked small and broken, her face buried in her hands. Tanisha was talking low and fast, her voice carrying on the wind like a poisonous vapor. I crept closer, risking arrest just to hear what she was saying, and the words I caught made my knees buckle. Tanisha was rewriting the history of Etta death, twisting the most painful moment of our lives into a weapon. She was telling Aaliyah that Etta did not die of a stroke brought on by exhaustion, she was saying. Etta died because we could not afford a surgery that would have saved her. She told Aaliyah that I had the money sitting in a bank account, but I was too cheap to spend it. She said, "I watched my wife die to save a few $1,000s. The lie was so monstrous it took my breath away. The truth was that Etta died working double shifts to pay off the drug dealers Tanisha had sent to our door demanding payment for debts. She ran up before vanishing. Etta's heart gave out because she was carrying the weight of her daughter's sins, but Tanisha was painting me as a miser who let his wife perish." Aaliyah lifted her head, and I saw the change in her eyes. The confusion had hardened into hate. She stood up abruptly, her fists clenched at her sides, and looked toward the alley as if she sensed my presence. I stepped out from the shadows, instinctively reaching a hand through the chain-link fence. "Aaliyah, baby girl," I whispered. It is not true, but she did not let me finish. She ran to the fence, her face twisted in a snarl I had never seen before. "You killed her!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet neighborhood like a gunshot. "Mom told me everything. Grandma died because you wanted to keep your money. You let her die and you lied to us. You are a murderer." Tanisha stood on the porch watching with a satisfied smirk. Her arms crossed over her chest. She did not need to shout or fight. She had turned my own granddaughter into her soldier. "Stay away from us," Aaliyah yelled, her voice cracking with sobs. "I hate you. I never want to see you again." She turned and ran back into the house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood there, gripping the cold metal of the fence, feeling the ghost of Etta standing beside me, weeping. The woman I loved died saving this family, and now her memory was being used to destroy it. I wanted to roar, I wanted to tear the fence down, but I knew that any violence would only prove Tanisha right, so I turned and walked away into the darkness, carrying the weight of a crime I did not commit. The next morning, I walked into the county courthouse with Robert Stone by my side, but the air in the room felt heavy and stagnant like a tomb. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be a formality, a chance for a judge to review the emergency custody order. But the moment I saw who was sitting on the bench, I knew the verdict had already been decided. Judge Vance was a man with a reputation for favoring the wealthy, but more importantly, he was a man I had seen playing golf with Hunter at the country club back when I was working maintenance there years ago. They were not just acquaintances. They were part of the same club that looked at men like me and saw nothing but labor. Hunter sat at the plaintiff table looking impeccable in a navy suit, his hand resting possessively on Tanisha's arm. She was dressed in black, playing the grieving daughter to perfection, sobbing quietly into a tissue. Whenever the judge looked her way, Robert tried to present our evidence. He tried to speak about the lies and the manipulation, but Judge Vance cut him off at every turn. "Objection sustained," the judge droned before Robert could even finish a sentence. "This is a hearing about the immediate safety of the children. Mr. Stone, not a relitigation of the past. Then came the ruling delivered with the casual indifference of a man ordering lunch based on the testimony of the minor child. Aaliyah regarding her fear of the defendant and the allegations of past neglect. The court finds that there is an imminent risk of psychological harm. Judge Vance said, not looking me in the eye. Mr. Banks, you are hereby stripped of all visitation rights, pending a full psychological evaluation. Furthermore, to ensure the peace of mind of the victims, you are ordered to vacate the jurisdiction of this county for a period of 24 hours. Immediately following this hearing, I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Leave the county, I asked, my voice rising. That is my home. My life is here. The judge banged his gavel order. Mr. Banks, or I will hold you in contempt. This cooling-off period is necessary to de-escalate the situation. The sheriff will escort you to the county line. You are not to return until tomorrow noon. It was a banishment, plain and simple. They were not just taking my kids. They were erasing me from the map, telling me I was a contagion that needed to be removed. Hunter turned to look at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a victory lap, without moving a muscle. He had weaponized the law to do what he could not do with his fists. He had made me a homeless man in the town I helped build. I looked at Robert, who was shaking his head in disgust, his face red with suppressed rage. Go, Luther, he whispered. We will fight this on appeal, but if you stay, they will lock you up and you cannot fight from a cage. I walked out of that courthouse, flanked by 2 deputies who looked at me like I was trash. I got into my truck and drove toward the county line, feeling the invisible walls of the city closing me out. But I did not keep driving until I hit the next state. I drove to a small rest stop just across the border, a place where truckers slept and weary travelers stopped for coffee. I parked in the back corner away from the lights and waited. I knew the war was not over. I knew that even in the darkest hour there is always a flicker of light, and that light came in the form of a text message from a number I did not recognize. Meet me at the old water tower. Midnight, come alone. I knew it was Jordan, the boy who had learned silence from me and survival from the streets. I waited until the moon was high, and then I drove back, risking my freedom, risking everything. I parked a mile away from the water tower and hiked through the woods, moving silent as a shadow. Jordan was there, shivering in the cool night air, wearing a hoodie that was too big for him and looking over his shoulder every few seconds when he saw me. He did not run to hug me. He just let out a breath he had been holding for days. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather-bound book, its cover worn and stained with age. I found this, he said, his voice shaking. I was looking for a place to hide my cash in case I needed to run, and I pried up a loose floorboard in Mom's old room, the one you turned into a sewing room for Grandma. This was wrapped in a plastic bag tucked way back near the wall. I took the book, my hands trembling. It was a diary. Tanisha. Diary from 15 years ago. I opened it to the last marked page. The date was the day before she left. The ink was faded, but the words were clear, written in the looping handwriting of a girl who only cared about herself. I read the entry under the moonlight, and I felt the blood drain from my face. Finally found a way out. The entry read, Rico says we can go to Atlanta, but no kids allowed. Fine. By me. I am so sick of the crying and the smell and the old man judging me. I took the money from Mom. Jar, it is enough for a start. Goodbye. Jordan, goodbye. Aaliyah, finally free of these 2 burdens. I am never coming back, and I do not care what happens to them. Let the old man rot with them. I am going to be a star. I looked up at Jordan, tears streaming down my face. This was it. This was the proof that she did not leave because of depression or because I forced her out. She left because she viewed her own children as burdens. She stole from her dying mother to finance her escape with a drug dealer. This book was the key to unlocking the chains they had put around me. She never loved us, did she? Jordan asked, his voice small and sounding very young. I closed the book and put a hand on his shoulder. She loved herself, son, I said. But that does not mean you are not loved. I love you. Your grandma loved you. And we are going to use her own words to save you. Jordan nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. You have to go, Pops, he said. Hunter has cameras everywhere now. If he finds out I am gone, he will hurt Aaliyah. Go get help. Bring this to the judge. I watched him slip back into the shadows, a soldier returning to enemy lines armed with nothing but courage. I stood there holding the diary against my chest, feeling the weight of the truth it contained. Tomorrow was the final hearing. the battle that would decide everything. I was banished, beaten, and bruised. But I held the weapon that would bring the whole corrupt temple crashing down on their heads. Tanisha thought she had buried her past under floorboards and lies, but she forgot that nothing stays buried forever, especially not when a grandfather is willing to dig through hell to find it. Jordan thought he was a ghost, slipping back into the house through the kitchen window he had unlatched earlier, but he walked straight into an ambush. The kitchen lights blazed to life, instantly blinding him, and revealing Hunter sitting at the head of the table like a judge executing a sentence. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat in front of him, and his face was flushed with a dangerous heat that had nothing to do with the summer night. Tanisha stood by the stove, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look at her son. Hunter stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum, loud as a scream in the quiet house. "Where have you been, boy?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Jordan tried to stammer out a lie about taking a walk to clear his head, but Hunter was not in the mood for stories. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, and before Jordan could even raise his hands, Hunter backhanded him across the face. The sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed off the cabinets. Sickening crack that sent Jordan stumbling backward into the refrigerator. He slid down to the floor, dazed blood welling in the corner of his mouth, taste of copper filling his throat. He looked up, expecting to see his mother rushing to his aid, expecting Tanisha to scream to push her husband away to protect her child like a mother is supposed to do. But Tanisha did not move. She did not even flinch. She just looked at the expensive designer jacket Hunter had bought for Jordan, a jacket that was now scuffed from the fall. "Watch the merchandise," she snapped, her voice cold and annoyed. "That suit cost $2,000. Hunter, do not ruin it before the court date." Jordan looked at her, his heart breaking in his chest. She did not care about the blood on his lip. She cared about the fabric on his back. She was not a mother. She was a stylist, dressing a mannequin for a show. Hunter laughed a cruel barking sound and reached down, grabbing Jordan by the collar, hauling him up like a sack of flour. "You think? You are smart," Hunter hissed, his breath reeking of alcohol getting right in Jordan's face. "You think you can sneak around meeting with that old man plotting against me? I own this house, I own this town, and I own you." Jordan struggled, trying to push him away, but Hunter was heavy and fueled by a rage that had been simmering for weeks. He threw Jordan against the island counter, the granite edge digging into the boy, lower back making him gasp in pain. "I gave you a car. I gave you a future," Hunter shouted, striking Jordan again, this time a closed fist to the ribs. "And this is how you repay me, by acting like a spy for a washed-up factory worker. You ungrateful little punk." Jordan doubled over, wheezing, trying to catch his breath. But Hunter was not done. He was just getting started. He was stripping away the veneer of the benevolent stepfather and showing the monster underneath the man who solved problems with violence when money did not work. "Get him out of my sight," Tanisha said finally, but not to save him. "Get him downstairs before he bleeds on the hardwood." Hunter nodded, grabbing Jordan by the back of his neck and marching him toward the basement door. Jordan stumbled, his legs weak from the blows, but he kept his head down, protecting the secret in his shoe, protecting the one lifeline we had left. The basement was a finished rec room that I had built for the kids years ago, a place for video games and sleepovers, but tonight it became a prison. Hunter shoved Jordan down the stairs, sending him tumbling onto the carpet. He followed him down, locking the door at the top behind him. The air down there was cool and stale, smelling of the old furnace and fear. Hunter stood over Jordan, panting slightly. His tie loosened his eyes. Manic. He reached down and patted Jordan's pockets roughly, searching for the phone he knew every teenager carried. "Give it to me," he demanded, snatching Jordan's smartphone from his jeans pocket. He smashed it against the concrete floor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of glass. "No communication," he sneered. "No calling. Grandpa, no calling the police. You stay down here until you learn your place." Then the mask slipped completely. Hunter leaned in close, his face twisted into a sneer of pure hatred, and he used words that I will not repeat, words that no child should ever hear, words that belong in the darkest chapters of history. He called my grandson names that stripped away his humanity, names that reduced him to his skin color, names that Hunter had probably been thinking every time he smiled and shook our hands. He revealed that he did not just see Jordan as an obstacle. He saw him as property, as something less than human, something to be used and discarded. You people are all the same. Hunter spat, straightening up and wiping his hands on his pants as if touching Jordan had dirtied him. Always looking for a handout, always biting the hand that feeds you. Well, you are going to stay in this hole until the judge signs those papers, and if you make a sound, if you try to leave, I will not just beat you, I will bury you right here under the foundation and pour the concrete myself. He turned and walked up the stairs, his heavy footsteps pounding like a drum of war. The lock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in the silence, leaving Jordan alone in the dark, nursing his ribs, listening to the hum of the refrigerator upstairs and the muffled sound of his mother turning on the television, ignoring the violence that had just occurred beneath her feet. Jordan lay there for a long time, waiting until his breathing steadied, until the pain became a dull throb. He knew he was trapped. He knew he was in danger, but he also knew he was not disarmed. Hunter had destroyed the smartphone, but he had missed the burner phone. The cheap prepaid device I had taped inside Jordan high-top sneaker under the insole. It was a trick I learned in the Army. Always have a backup. Always have an ace in the hole. Jordan sat up, wincing, and pried off his shoe. His hands trembling, he pulled out the small phone and powered it on. Praying the battery still held a charge, the screen lit up a beacon. In the darkness, he did not dare make a call. His voice might carry through the vents, so he typed, his thumbs flying over the tiny keypad, pouring all his fear and urgency into a few short words. Pops. Help. Basement. Hunter crazy. He hit send and watched the little envelope icon fly off into the digital void, praying it would find me. I was sitting in my truck at the rest stop 200 miles away, staring at the moon and wondering if I had made a terrible mistake leaving them behind. The silence of the night was heavy, pressing down on me with the weight of my failure. When the phone buzzed against my thigh, it startled me so bad I nearly spilled my coffee. I grabbed it, my heart leaping into my throat, hoping for good news but fearing the worst. The message was short, broken, and terrifying. Help. Basement Hunter. Crazy 3 words that told me everything. 3 words that confirmed my darkest fears. Hunter had snapped. The facade was gone, and now he was taking his rage out on my boy. The image of Jordan trapped in the dark, hurt and alone, burned in my mind, igniting a fire in my gut that burned hotter than any anger I had ever felt. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to turn the truck around. I wanted to drive back there at 100 miles an hour and crash through the front door and tear Hunter apart with my bare hands. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go, to fight, to protect, but my mind, the soldier, mind that had kept me alive in the jungle, held me back. If I went back now, I would be arrested. Before I even reached the porch, I would be playing right into their hands, proving I was the violent instability they claimed I was, and Jordan and Aaliyah would still be prisoners. No, I could not go back. Not yet. I had to go forward. I had to get the weapon that would end this war once and for all. I had the diary, but I needed more. I needed the official seal, the undeniable proof that would stand up in a court of law against $1 million worth of lawyers. I needed the keeper of records. I looked at the map on my phone, the blue dot blinking at my location. The destination was another 100 miles east, deep into the next state, to a nursing home called Shady Pines, where a woman named Mrs. Jenkins was living out her final days. Mrs. Jenkins was the social worker who had handled Tanisha's case 15 years ago. The one who had seen the truth but had been silenced by bureaucracy and maybe a little bit of fear. She was the only one left who knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. I put the truck in gear, the engine roaring to life, a beast waking up from a slumber. "I am coming, son," I whispered to the empty cab. "Hold on. Just a little longer. I am coming. And I am bringing the thunder." I pulled out onto the highway, the tires singing on the asphalt, leaving the county line behind me. Again, driving away from my family to save them, it was the hardest thing had ever done, but as I watched the mile markers fly by, I knew it was the only way Hunter thought he had won, because he had physical force. He thought he could beat submission into my grandson. But he forgot that violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. He had shown his hand, he had revealed his true nature, and in doing so, he had given me the moral high ground. Now I just needed the paper to prove it. I drove through the night, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness. A grandfather on a mission, fueled by love and rage, racing against time to save the boy in the basement and the girl in the tower before the monster devoured them both. The nursing home was called Shady Pines, but there were no pines and very little shade. Just a squat brick building sitting on the edge of a swamp 3 hours across the state line, smelling of stale cafeteria food and forgotten lives. I parked my truck in the cracked lot and checked my watch. It was 3 a.m, but the front desk attendant, was asleep, and the automatic door slid open with a groan that sounded like a dying breath. I walked down the linoleum hallway, counting room numbers, my boots squeaking in the silence, looking for room 304, where the past was waiting to be dug up. I found Mrs. Jenkins sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the darkness. She was a shadow of the woman I remembered 15 years ago. She had been a sharp-eyed social worker with a clipboard and a stern face, the kind of woman who could spot a lie from across the room. Now she was frail, her skin like crumpled tissue paper, her eyes milky with cataracts and confusion. I knelt beside her and took her cold hand. "Mrs. Jenkins," I whispered. "It is Luther Banks. Do you remember me?" She looked at me, but she did not see me. "Who?" she asked, her voice a dry rattle. "I do not know you. I want my pudding." I squeezed her hand gently, trying to call her back from the fog. "Mrs. Jenkins, listen to me. I need your help. It is about the babies, Jordan. And Alia, the ones you helped save." She blinked and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "Babies," she murmured. "Nice babies, sad eyes." But then the fog rolled back in and she turned away, mumbling about the weather. I felt a surge of panic. Time was running out, and my only witness was lost in her own mind. I leaned closer, desperation making my voice rough. "Mrs. Jenkins, I need you to remember. Tanisha." I said the name like a curse. Tanisha Banks, the mother who left them. The reaction was instant and visceral. Mrs. Jenkins' body went rigid and she turned her head, snapping her eyes to mine with a clarity that was terrifying. "Tanisha." She hissed the name, tasting like poison in her mouth. The bad one, the one with the cold eyes. I remember her. She came here. She brought the envelope. "Yes, the envelope." I urged, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Where is it, Mrs. Jenkins? You told me you would keep it safe. You told me it was our insurance." She began to tremble, her hands clutching at her dressing gown she gave me. "Money," she whispered, tears leaking from her clouded eyes. $500 to burn it to make it go away. I was so broke, my husband was sick. I took the money. Lord forgive me. I took the money. I felt a wave of nausea. Tanisha had bribed a social worker to destroy the evidence of her abandonment to erase her children from her life for $500. That was what my grandkids were worth to her. But Mrs. Jenkins was still talking, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a guilt that had been eating her alive for a decade and a half. "But I did not burn it," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I could not do it. Those babies had no one but you, Mr. Banks. I knew she would come back someday. Evil always comes back." I hid it. Where I asked, "Where is it now?" She pointed a shaking finger toward the bottom of her small wardrobe inside the lining of the old blue suitcase. "Cut it open." I did not hesitate. I pulled the suitcase out, took my pocket knife and sliced through the fabric inside. Tucked between the cardboard stiffener and the silk lining was a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape and marked with the date from 15 years ago. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in my hands. It was heavy, heavy with sins and salvation. I looked at Mrs. Jenkins. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You just saved their lives." She closed her eyes, leaning back into her chair, exhausted by the effort. "Tell the truth," she whispered. "Just tell the truth, before I die." I walked out of that room clutching the envelope like it was the Holy Grail. I did not open it until I was back in the truck with the doors locked and the engine running. I tore the seal and slid the contents out onto the passenger seat. Under the dim dome light, I saw the documents that would end the war. There were 3 papers. The first was a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights signed by Tanisha Banks 15 years ago, notarized and official in it. She stated clearly that she was unfit, that she had no desire to raise Jordan or Aaliyah, and that she surrendered all legal claims to me permanently. The second document was even more damning. It was a police report from the same week she left detailing her arrest for possession of narcotics with intent to distribute, a charge that had mysteriously vanished from the public record, likely expunged by some favor or bribe. But here it was preserved in black and white, proving she was not a depressed mother but a criminal. But the third paper was the one that made my blood run cold. It was a letter handwritten by Tanisha to Mrs. Jenkins confirming the bribe. "Here is the cash. Make the file disappear if anyone asks. I was never there. I am going to be famous, and I do not need baggage." Baggage. She called her own children baggage. I carefully put the papers back into the envelope and tucked it inside my jacket next to my heart. This was it. The silver bullet. The nuclear option. With this, I could walk into court tomorrow and not only win custody but send Tanisha to prison for fraud and bribery. I put the truck in gear and pulled out onto the highway, adrenaline coursing through my veins, keeping me awake despite the exhaustion. I was 200 miles from home, 200 miles from saving my boy in the basement and my girl in the tower. I checked the time. It was 4 in the morning. The court hearing was at 9. I could make it if I drove straight through, if nothing went wrong. I was on a stretch of lonely 2-lane blacktop winding through the hills, the road empty except for the occasional possums scurrying across the asphalt. I was thinking about Jordan, imagining the look on his face when I walked through that door. When suddenly a blinding light filled my rearview mirror, a vehicle was coming up behind me, fast, too fast, high beams blazing like searchlights. I tapped my brakes, expecting them to pass, but the vehicle stayed right on my bumper, so close I could not see their grille. It was a large black pickup truck lifted high with tinted windows and no license plate. My combat instincts kicked in instantly. This was not a tailgater. This was a hunter. I floored the accelerator, my old Ford groaning as I pushed it past 70, but the black truck matched my speed easily, its engine roaring like a predator. Then it hit me. The truck surged forward, slamming into my rear bumper with a force that snapped my head back and sent my truck fishtailing across the yellow line. I wrestled with the steering wheel, fighting to keep it on the road, sparks flying as my back bumper dragged on the asphalt. He hit me again, harder this time, spinning me around so I was facing him, headlights to headlights. I saw the silhouette of the driver, a big man wearing a tactical cap, and for a second I thought of Hunter's security guard. He was trying to kill me. He was trying to push me off the road into the ravine that dropped away steeply on my left side. I slammed on the brakes and cut the wheel, hoping to slide past him, but he anticipated the move. He swerved and slammed into my passenger side, the metal screaming as his heavy grille crushed my door, caving it in. My truck was lighter, older, and no match for this modern tank. I felt the wheels leave the pavement, felt the sickening lurch of gravity taking over as we went over the edge. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of breaking glass, twisting metal and darkness. I heard the crunch of the truck rolling, once, twice, 3 times, the roof collapsing, the windshield shattering into a million diamonds, then silence, abrupt and terrifying. I was hanging upside down, suspended by my seatbelt, the smell of gasoline filling the cab sharp and stinging. I tasted blood, warm and metallic in my mouth. My head was throbbing, a rhythmic drumbeat of pain, and my left leg was pinned under the crushed dashboard, screaming in agony. I tried to move, and a wave of dizziness washed over me, threatening to pull me into the black. "No," I grunted, gritting my teeth. "I cannot die here, not with the envelope." I reached into my jacket, checking for the papers. They were still there, crumpled, but safe. I looked out the broken window and saw a flicker of orange light somewhere above me. On the road, the black truck had stopped, and a man was getting out, holding a flashlight, scanning the wreck down below. He was coming to finish the job, or to retrieve the evidence. I could not let him find me. I fumbled for the seatbelt release, but it was jammed, stuck fast by the force of the impact. The smell of gas was getting stronger, and now I heard an ominous crackling sound underneath the hood fire. I reached into my boot and pulled out my old army knife, the blade I had carried since I was 19. I sawed at the seatbelt. The nylon tough but yielding, finally it snapped, and I dropped onto the roof of the cab, groaning as my injured leg hit the metal. I dragged myself toward the broken rear window, the jagged glass slicing my hands, but I did not feel it. The adrenaline was a powerful drug, masking the pain, focusing the mind. I squeezed through the window and fell onto the wet grass of the ravine floor. Looking up, I saw the flashlight beam dancing over the wreckage, getting closer. The man was sliding down the embankment, rocks tumbling ahead of him. I had to move. I had to disappear. I dragged myself into the thick brush, ignoring the agony in my leg, moving with the stealth of a soldier who had survived worse jungles than this. I made it about 50 yards into the woods when the truck exploded, the gas tank igniting with a whoosh of heat and light that turned the night into day. The force of the blast knocked me flat, and I watched as my old Ford, my companion for 20 years, burned, turning into a twisted skeleton of steel. The man on the embankment stopped shielding his eyes from the heat. He watched it burn for a minute, probably assuming no one could have survived that inferno. Then he turned and climbed back up to the road, satisfied that the job was done. I lay in the dirt watching the flames, hearing the distant sound of the black truck driving away, leaving me for dead. I was battered, bleeding and broken. My leg was useless, dragging behind me like a dead weight, and I was miles from nowhere, with no phone, no vehicle, and no help. But as I reached into my jacket and felt the thick envelope still tucked securely against my chest, I smiled a grim, bloody smile through the pain. Hunter thought he had incinerated his problem. He thought he had wiped me off the board, but he had made a fatal error. He had not checked the body. I was alive, and I still had the truth. I forced myself to stand, using a fallen branch as a crutch, and looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was turning the sky gray. I had 5 hours to get to the courthouse, 5 hours to walk, crawl, or bleed my way back to civilization. It was going to be the longest march of my life, but I would make it. I would walk through fire if I had to, because I had a promise to keep and a reckoning to deliver. My name is Luther Banks. I am 68 years old, and for the last 15 years, I have been the father, mother, and grandfather to 2 children who were thrown away like yesterday trash. Jordan was 4 and Aaliyah was 2, when their mother, my daughter Tanisha, walked out that door and vanished into the night. She was chasing a high that I could not provide, and a man who promised her the world but gave her nothing but bruises. I remember the night she left clearly because it was the night my wife Etta cried until she fell asleep, holding little Aaliyah, who was asking for her mommy. Etta died 2 years later from a broken heart and overworked hands, leaving me alone to guide these kids through a world that is not kind to young black men and women without money. We made it work, though. We did not have much, but we had dignity. I retired early from the auto plant to be there when they got home from school. I learned to braid hair for Aaliyah, and I taught Jordan how to shave and how to look a man in the eye. When you shake his hand, we were a team, a unit forged in the fire of abandonment and cooled in the waters of unconditional love, and today was supposed to be our victory lap. It was a humid Saturday afternoon in June, the kind where the heat sticks to your shirt, but the lemonade tastes like heaven. Aaliyah had just graduated from high school with honors, the first in our family to do so, and we were throwing a barbecue in the small backyard of the house I had owned since 1980. I looked around at the paper plates loaded with ribs and potato salad, at the neighbors dancing to old-school soul music, and at Jordan, who was 19 now and standing guard by the gate like he always did. Jordan had grew up too fast, taking on the role of protector before he could even tie his own shoes. He was watching the street. His eyes narrowed, and I walked over to him, clapping a hand on his broad shoulder. "Relax, son," I told him, handing him a soda. "She did it. Your sister is going to college." Jordan smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I have a bad feeling, Pops," he said quietly. "I saw a black car pass by 3 times slow, like they were casing the joint. I told him it was probably just lost folks looking for the highway. But deep down, my stomach tightened, that old soldier instinct flaring up just a little. I turned my attention back to Aaliyah. She was laughing with her friends, her gown still on because she was too proud to take it off. I called everyone to attention. Tapping my fork against my glass, silence fell over the yard, and I pulled a small velvet box from my pocket. "Aaliyah, baby girl," I said, my voice cracking just a bit. "Your grandma. Etta made me promise to give you this when you graduated. She bought this 30 years ago and hid it away. Even when we were broke, even when the lights got cut off, she never sold it." I opened the box to reveal a simple gold locket. Aaliyah gasped and ran to hug me, burying her face in my chest. "Thank you, Grandpa," she sobbed. "Thank you for everything. It was a perfect moment, the kind of moment you freeze in your mind to keep you warm when the cold winds blow." But the cold wind came sooner than I expected. It came with the wail of sirens cutting through the music and the laughter. First, it was 1 cruiser, then 2, then 3. They screeched to a halt in front of my driveway, lights flashing red and blue against the siding of my house. The music died instantly. Neighbors backed away, whispering and pointing. Jordan stepped in front of me and Aaliyah, his fists clenched. But what froze my blood was not the police. It was the long, sleek black limousine that pulled up behind them. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door, and out stepped a woman I had not seen in 15 years, but I would know those eyes anywhere. It was Tanisha, but not the Tanisha I knew. This woman was wearing a white designer suit that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, and she was draped in diamonds. She looked like money, real money, the kind that does not apologize. She stepped onto the sidewalk and pointed a manicured finger straight at me, her face twisting into a mask of anguish that looked rehearsed. "Officer, that is him," she screamed. "That is the man who stole my babies. Arrest him immediately." Beside her stepped a man who looked like he owned the block. He was white, tall with silver hair, and a suit that screamed power. He walked with the arrogance of a man who has never been told no in his life. This was Hunter Tanisha. New husband. I assumed, though I had never met him. He whispered something to the police captain, a man named Miller who had just transferred here last month and didn't know me from Adam. Miller nodded sharply and marched up my driveway, his hand resting on his holster. "Mr. Banks, put your hands where I can see them," Miller barked, ignoring the fact that I was holding a hugging teenager. "Step away from the girl." I gently pushed Aaliyah behind me. "Stand down." "Jordan," I ordered, my voice calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Officer, this is my granddaughter. We are celebrating her graduation." "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Miller said, pulling out his handcuffs. "We have a warrant for your arrest for custodial interference and kidnapping." "Kidnapping," I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. "I have raised these children for 15 years. I have court documents." "Those documents are forged," Tanisha yelled, rushing past the police line to grab Aaliyah, my baby. "Oh my God. My baby mommy is here. I finally found you." Aaliyah looked terrified, backing away from this stranger who smelled like expensive perfume and lies. "Who are you?" Aaliyah asked, her voice trembling. Tanisha sobbed a loud theatrical sound that made the neighbors murmur. "Surely this rich woman must be telling the truth. Look at her. Look at him. They must have thought I am your mother, baby. Your grandfather stole you from me. He told me you were dead. He kept you hidden all these years. It was a lie so big, so audacious that it took the air out of my lungs. I stepped forward to speak, to tell the truth about the crack pipe I found under her bed 15 years ago, about the empty bank account, about the note she left saying she could not handle the burden of kids. But before I could speak, 2 officers grabbed my arms and slammed me face first onto the hood of a patrol car. "Ouch! Watch his shoulder," Jordan yelled, lunging forward. "Do not touch my grandfather." Hunter stepped in, then smooth as a snake, he put a hand on Jordan's chest and shoved him back with surprising strength. "Easy there, boy," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You do not want to add assaulting an officer to your family criminal record." Jordan looked at me, his eyes wild with rage and fear. I shook my head as best I could with my cheek pressed against the hot metal. "No, Jordan," I wheezed. "Do not fight them. Not here. Call Robert Stone. Call him now." The officers wrenched my arms behind my back, and the metal cuffs bit into my wrists, clicking shut with a sound of finality. They hauled me up, and I saw Tanisha trying to hug Aaliyah, who was stiff as a board, crying silently. Jordan was being held back by neighbors, screaming that this was illegal, that they could not do this, but the police did not listen to the black teenager in the hoodie. They listened to the white man in the suit and the crying woman in diamonds. Hunter walked over to me as they shoved me toward the back of the cruiser. He leaned in close, so only I could hear. His cologne was overpowering, masking the scent of the barbecue smoke. "You did a good job, old man," he whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "They are healthy, well-mannered, and exactly what we need. Thanks for fattening them up for me now. Do yourself a favor and die in jail. It will be cheaper for everyone." He patted my cheek disrespectfully and stepped back, nodding to Officer Miller. "Take him away, Captain. He is dangerous." Miller shoved me into the back seat and slammed the door. I watched through the wire mesh as Tanisha steered a sobbing Aaliyah toward the limousine, and Hunter pointed at Jordan, gesturing for him to get in the car too. Jordan looked at me one last time and I nodded, telling him without words to go to protect his sister, to survive. As the cruiser pulled away, I did not look back at my house or the ruined party. I looked at my hands bound in my lap, and I felt a cold rage settling in my gut. They thought they had won because they had money and power. They thought I was just a helpless old man who would break under pressure, but they forgot one thing. I was a foreman. I knew how to build things, and I knew how to take them apart, piece by piece. Tanisha had forgotten who raised her. She had forgotten that Luther Banks does not break. He waits. And while I waited in that cell, I was going to plan the most painful lesson my daughter would ever learn. The courtroom doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the murmur of the crowd in the hallway and sealing us inside a chamber that smelled of floor wax and old lies. My entrance had the effect of a hand grenade tossed into a polite dinner party silence. Detonated instantly, shattering the rhythm of the proceedings. Tanisha froze halfway through a sob, her mouth hanging open in a grotesque parody of grief, while Hunter half rose from his chair, his face draining of color as if he were seeing a ghost. And in a way he was. He was seeing the ghost of the man he thought he had burned alive in a ravine 200 miles away. I limped down the center aisle, my left leg dragging slightly, a reminder of the crash that should have killed me. My clothes were torn and stained with mud and dried blood, and a bandage was wrapped around my forehead. But I did not feel the pain. Not anymore. The adrenaline of justice was the only fuel keeping me upright. Robert Stone turned to look at me, and for the first time in 40 years I saw his composure crack a smile of pure relief, breaking through his professional mask. He nodded once, a soldier acknowledging reinforcements. "Your Honor, I object," Tanisha lawyer screeched, jumping to his feet, his voice shrill with panic. "This man has no standing here. He is a fugitive who violated a court order and fled the jurisdiction. He should be arrested immediately, not allowed to disrupt these proceedings. Remove him. Bailiff, remove him." Now, Judge Vance looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He did not see a grandfather fighting for his kin. He saw a disruption, a mess that was staining his clean courtroom. "Mr. Stone, control your client," the judge barked. "Mr. Banks, you are on very thin ice. Explain yourself before I have you thrown in a cell for contempt." Robert stepped forward, his voice booming, filling the room with the weight of authority. "Your Honor, my client was not fleeing. He was retrieving evidence that was illegally suppressed 15 years ago, and evidence that proves that the plaintiffs are not here for custody but to cover up a federal crime. We move to submit this evidence immediately, and we call Luther Banks to the stand." The opposing lawyer sputtered, objections citing procedure and relevance, but Robert slammed his hand on the table, creates a sound like a gunshot. "This is relevant to the character and fitness of the parents, Your Honor, and it is relevant to the safety of these children, unless the court wants to be complicit in a felony. I suggest you let him speak." Judge Vance hesitated, looking from Hunter, pale face, to my bloodied one. Finally, curiosity, or perhaps self-preservation, won out. "Allow it," the judge grunted, "but make it quick. Mr. Banks, take the stand." I walked to the witness box, every step of victory. I sat down and placed the thick yellow envelope on the ledge in front of me. It was dirty and crumpled from the crash, but the seal was broken, and the truth was ready to spill out. I looked at Aaliyah sitting in the front row, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked at my injuries, then at her mother, and I saw the doubt creeping back in the crack in the brainwashing Mr. Banks. Robert asked, standing tall in the center of the room, "Tell the court what is in that envelope." I opened the clasp, my fingers steady. Despite the trauma, I reached inside and pulled out a stack of documents that smelled of mildew and secrets. "These," I said, my voice raspy but loud enough to reach the back row, "are Social Security Administration benefit statements dating back 15 years. Confusion rippled through the room. Tanisha lawyer frowned, looking at his client, asking a silent question. But Tanisha was staring at the table, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. She knew exactly what I was holding. For 15 years, I continued holding up the top sheet. Tanisha Banks has been filing monthly claims for 2 children she reported as living in her care. 2 children she claims suffered from severe developmental and physical disabilities requiring full-time home care, according to these sworn affidavits signed by Tanisha herself. Jordan is unable to walk without assistance, and Aaliyah suffers from profound cognitive delays that prevent her from attending school. A gasp went up from the gallery. Aaliyah stood up involuntarily, her hand covering her mouth. Jordan, who had been sitting silently next to a bailiff, looked at his mother with a mixture of horror and realization. I looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor, my grandchildren are athletes and honor students. They have never been disabled, and they have never lived with this woman. She did not just abandon them, she used their names to steal from the government. She has been collecting $3,000 a month for 15 years. That is $540,000, over $500,000 stolen in the names of the children she threw away." Tanisha let out a wail that was not acting. This time it was the sound of a trapped animal. "No," she screamed, standing up, knocking her chair over. "That is a lie. Those are fake. He forged them. I love my babies. I would never use them." "Sit down!" the judge roared, banging his gavel. "Mrs. Banks, control yourself, or you will be held in contempt." I did not stop. I pulled out the next document. Bank statement showing the direct deposits. Looking at these records, Your Honor, you will see the money did not go to medical care or therapy or school supplies. It went to a private account, an account used to pay for luxury cars, designer clothes, and vacations, while I worked double shifts at the plant to buy diapers and formula, while we ate beans and rice. She was eating steak, paid for by the very children she claimed were burdens. I looked at Tanisha, my eyes burning into hers. "You called them burdens in your diary," I said, my voice dropping to a growl. "But they were not burdens to you. Were they? They were paychecks. You kept them on paper, just enough to cash the checks, but you threw them away in real life because raising them was too much work, but spending their money was easy." Tanisha collapsed back into her chair, sobbing hysterically, shaking her head, mumbling denials that no one believed. The room had turned, the temperature had dropped, and the sympathy she had cultivated with her tears and her lies had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard disgust. Even her own lawyer took a half step away from her, distancing himself from the blast radius. But I was not done yet, because a fraud this big, this long-lasting, does not happen in a vacuum. It needs help, it needs verification, it needs a system to wash the dirty money and make it look clean. And that brought me to the second monster in the room. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out a series of canceled checks and residency verification forms. "These documents," I said, holding them up for the judge to see, "require a third-party verification, a landlord or a business owner to certify that the children are indeed living at the address provided and receiving the care claimed for the last 10 years. That verification came from one source." I turned my gaze to Hunter. He was sitting rigid, his eyes fixed on the exit, calculating the distance, debating if he could run, but the bailiffs were blocking the doors and he knew it. He was trapped in the web he had helped spin. "The verification comes from Hunter Real Estate Holdings," I announced, reading the stamp on the bottom of the forms, specifically from a subsidiary managed by Mr. Hunter. Personally, he certified that Tanisha and the disabled children were tenants in one of his properties. He certified that he saw them daily. He lied to the federal government to help her keep the scam going. Why would a wealthy real estate developer risk federal prison for a few $1,000s a month? Robert asked, leading the witness perfectly, because he was not just verifying. I said, pulling out the final piece of the financial puzzle, copies of checks written from Tanisha account, back to Hunter Shell Companies. "Look at the dates, Your Honor, every month. 2 days after the government deposit hits Tanisha account. A check for 50% of the total is written to Hunter Consulting Services for rent and management fees." The courtroom erupted. It was not just a murmur this time, it was an uproar. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. People were standing up to get a better look. Hunter lawyer was whispering frantically in his ear, but Hunter pushed him away, his face a mask of fury and fear. "This is money laundering," I stated, my voice cutting through the noise. He was not helping her out of the goodness of his heart. He was taking a cut. He was washing the stolen government funds through his rental properties, creating a stream of untraceable cash to prop up his failing business empire. Hunter stood up, slamming his hands on the table. "That is enough," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This old man is lying. These documents are forgeries. He is trying to frame us because he is bitter. I am a pillar of this community. I built half this town. You cannot take the word of a senile kidnapper over mine." Judge Vance looked at Hunter, then at the documents in my hand, then back at Hunter. The judge's face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Banks, bring those documents to the bench," he ordered. I stood up and limped to the judge bench, handing him the stack of papers. He put on his reading glasses and flipped through them. Silence descended on the room, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the rustling of paper as the judge traced the path of the money, the path of the lies. After a long minute, Judge Vance looked up over his glasses, his gaze fixing on Hunter. "Mr. Hunter, these verification forms bear your signature and your corporate seal, and these bank statements show direct transfers to your personal holding company. Do you have an explanation for why you were collecting rent for 2 children who we have established were living with their grandfather 200 miles away?" Hunter opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Tanisha, who was a sobbing mess. Then he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the arrogance break. I saw the realization that his money could not buy his way out of this one. He was not just looking at a custody battle anymore, he was looking at a RICO case, he was looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. I did not know, Hunter stammered, the fight draining out of him. She told me they were there. I never checked the units. I own hundreds of apartments. I just signed what my property managers put in front of me. You signed it personally, I reminded him, pointing to the documents, and you cashed the checks personally. You knew exactly where that money was coming from. You were robbing these children just as much as she was. I turned to the jury box, even though there was no jury, only the court of public opinion sitting in the gallery, and I delivered the final blow of this round. You wanted to tear down my house to build your mall. Not because it was a good investment, but because you needed to bury the evidence. You needed to destroy the past, so no one would ever look too closely at where your money came from. You were willing to kill us to keep your secret safe. Hunter sank back into his chair, defeated, his eyes hollow. He knew it was over. The financial trail was too clear, too documented. He had been arrogant, thinking no one would ever audit a poor single mother, thinking no one would ever listen to a factory worker. But he was wrong. I looked at Jordan and Aaliyah. They were clinging to each other, looking at the adults who were supposed to protect them, and seeing them for the monsters they were. The betrayal in their eyes was heartbreaking. But it was better than the lie. It was the pain of a bone breaking, so it could be set right. The judge leaned back, rubbing his temples. This court has seen enough to establish probable cause for serious criminal misconduct, he said, his voice grave. Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves this room until the federal authorities arrive. I am declaring a recess to review this evidence and to determine the immediate custody of the minors. But I was not done. I had one more paper in the envelope, one more secret that would shatter what was left of their world and turn their hatred into something far more personal. The money was just the greed, but what came next was the biological betrayal that would sever the tie forever. I looked at Hunter, and I saw him take a breath, thinking maybe he could cut a deal, thinking maybe he could blame Tanisha and walk away. But he did not know about the DNA test. He did not know that I knew why he really needed Aaliyah, and it was not for her company, it was for her blood. The room was spinning into chaos. Tanisha was on her feet, her face a mask of ruined mascara and desperation. She was screaming that the fraud was ancient history, that people changed, that she only wanted to be a mother now, but her voice was shrill and hollow, echoing off the wood paneling like a banshee. She claimed she wanted to make up for lost time, that she wanted to buy Aaliyah the prom dress she never had and take Jordan to football games. But everyone in that room, including the judge, could smell the lie on her breath. It smelled like fear, and it smelled like a cornered animal trying to gnaw its own leg off to escape a trap. She reached out toward Aaliyah, her hands trembling, begging for a hug, begging for validation. But Aaliyah shrank back into her seat, pressing herself against the wooden bench. Her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and realization, she finally saw the woman in front of her, not as a savior, but as a predator who had fed off her name for 15 years. Hunter did not scream. He did not beg. He moved. He stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward onto the floor, and he turned toward the side exit, his movements jerky and panicked. He pushed past his own lawyer, shoving the man aside with a grunt of effort. He was done with the charade. He was done with the family man act. He just wanted out before the handcuffs clicked shut. He made it 3 steps before a bailiff. A mountain of a man with a shaved head stepped into his path, blocking the aisle like a stone wall. "Sit down, sir," the bailiff ordered, his hand resting on his taser. Hunter looked at the door, then at the bailiff, then back at the judge. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked trapped. He looked like a rat in a maze who just realized there was no cheese, only a long drop. Judge Vance banged his gavel, the sound sharp and authoritative order. He bellowed, "Order in this court, or I will clear the room. Mrs. Banks, sit down. Mr. Hunter, if you take one more step toward that door, you will be remanded into custody immediately." The room fell into a tense silence broken only by Tanisha, jagged breathing, and the sound of Hunter sinking back into his chair, defeated. But his eyes were darting around, wild and calculating, looking for an angle, looking for a deal. I stood in the witness box, watching them squirm, and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. They thought the money was the kill shot. They thought the fraud was the worst of it. But they were wrong. The money was just greed. What I held in my hand now was something far darker, something that spoke to the rot in their souls. I reached into the envelope one last time, my fingers brushing against the crisp paper of the final document. This was the reason I had driven through the night. This was the reason I had survived the crash. Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. We have established that they wanted the money, and we have established that they wanted the land. But there is one question that remains unanswered. Why did they need custody of the children? Specifically, why did Hunter fight so hard for a girl he had never met? A girl he planned to ship off to Switzerland. Hunter Head snapped up his eyes, locking onto mine, and for the first time I saw true terror there. Not the fear of prison, but the fear of exposure, the fear of his deepest secret being dragged into the light. I held up the document. It was a DNA test report, the logo of a private genetic lab stamped at the top. 3 weeks ago. I continued. I met Mr. Hunter at a restaurant. He was drinking scotch. He was nervous. He left his glass on the table when he stormed out. I took that glass and I sent a saliva sample to a private lab, along with a hair sample from my granddaughter, Aaliyah. Aaliyah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, looking from me to Hunter, confusion warring with horror on her face. The results are conclusive. I announced, my voice steady as a rock. Hunter is not Aaliyah's stepfather. He is her biological father. The courtroom erupted again. But this time, it was different. It was not the angry buzz of a scandal. It was the shocked gasp of a tragedy revealed. Tanisha put her head in her hands, sobbing quietly while Hunter stared at the table, his jaw clenched tight enough to break teeth. 17 years ago, I said, turning to the jury of public opinion, Tanisha was not just a wild girl running the streets. She was the mistress of a wealthy, married real estate developer named Hunter. He was older, he was rich, and he promised her the world. But when she got pregnant, he did not leave his wife. He did not buy her a house. He gave her $5,000 and told her to get rid of the problem. I looked at Tanisha. Tell them I challenged her. Tell them why you came back home pregnant and broke. Tell them why you hated that baby so much. You left her with me and vanished. Tanisha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hateful. He promised he would come back for me, she whispered, her voice trembling. He said, if I handled it, he would come back later, but he never did until now. So you kept the baby, I said, finishing the story for her, but you resented her every day. She was a reminder of the man who rejected you. That is why you left. That is why you ran off with a dealer, because looking at Aaliyah was like looking at your own failure. But Hunter came back, didn't he? I turned my gaze to the man in the expensive suit shrinking in his chair. 15 years later, he knocks on your door. He is divorced. He is desperate, and suddenly he wants to be a family man. He marries you. He buys you diamonds. He promises to get your kids back. Why? Hunter slammed his fist on the table. Shut up, he roared. Shut up, old man. You do not know what you are talking about. This is private medical information. It is evidence of motive, I shouted back over him, holding up the second part of the report, the part that I had obtained from Mrs. Jenkins' files, the part that connected the dots in a way that made the blood run cold. Hunter did not come back for love. Declared, pointing a shaking finger at him, he came back because he is dying. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Aaliyah lowered her hands, her eyes fixed on the man she now knew was her father, the man who had bought her boots and bags but never asked her favorite color. I held up a medical file, a copy of a report from the City Oncology Center obtained through the discovery phase of the lawsuit Hunter himself had filed against a contractor weeks ago, acute myeloid leukemia. I read the diagnosis loud and clear. Aggressive and advanced chemotherapy is failing. He needs a bone marrow transplant to survive, but he has a rare tissue type. None of his siblings are a match. There are no donors on the registry. I walked to the edge of the witness box, leaning over the railing so I could look straight into Hunter's soul. He did not come for a daughter, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. He came for a donor. He came for a harvest. The horror in the room was palpable. Judge Vance looked sick, his face pale as he looked at the man he used to play golf with. Aaliyah let out a low keen, a sound of pure heartbreak. She looked at her mother, then at Hunter, connecting the pieces of the puzzle herself. You were going to force her, I said, my voice rising with the tide of my rage. You needed custody because, as a minor, she cannot consent to a surgical procedure without a parent permission. You were going to take her to Switzerland, not for school, but to a private clinic where they do not ask questions. You were going to strap her down and drain her marrow to save your own miserable life. Hunter stood up, his chair flying backward, hitting the wall with a crash. Yes, he screamed, his face purple with rage and desperation. So, what? She is my daughter. I gave her life. She owes me this. I am a titan of industry. I build cities. She is nothing. She is a nobody, living in a shack I deserve to live. The confession hung in the air, ugly and naked. He had admitted it. He believed his life was worth more than hers. He believed she was spare parts property to be used up and discarded. Aaliyah stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She looked at the man who had sired her, the man who had tried to buy her with leather and silk, and she saw him for the first time, not as a rich savior but as a vampire. I am not nothing, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I am Luther Banks' granddaughter, and I would not give you a drop of my blood if you were the last man on earth. Hunter lunged toward the rail, his eyes wild, grabbing for her, as if he could take what he needed by force right there in the courtroom. Give it to me, he screamed. You ungrateful little brat, I made you. The bailiffs were on him in a second, tackling him to the floor, pinning him down as he thrashed and cursed, screaming about his rights, about his money, about his life. Tanisha sat frozen, watching her golden ticket turn into a monster, realizing finally that she had been used just as much as her children, that he never loved her, he just needed her womb product. I looked at Jordan, who was standing protectively in front of his sister, his fists clenched, ready to fight, and I saw the pride in his eyes. He saw me not as a broken old man, but as the shield. I promised Etta I would be. I looked at the judge, who was pounding his gavel, calling for order, calling for the record to reflect the threats. But the record did not matter anymore. The truth was out, the monster was unmasked, and the family he tried to consume was standing tall, united by the horror of what they had almost lost. I stepped down from the witness box, my legs trembling from exhaustion, but my spirit soaring. I walked over to my grandkids, ignoring the chaos of the police subduing Hunter and the wailing of Tanisha. I opened my arms, and they fell into them, holding on tight, sobbing, washing away the lies and the fear. With their tears, we were battered, we were scarred, but we were together. And as I looked over their heads at the man being dragged away in handcuffs, I knew that the cancer might kill him, but the justice I just served would hurt a whole lot more first. The courtroom doors slammed open again, but this time it wasn't a limping old man entering. It was the full force of the federal government, led by a woman in a windbreaker, with those 3 letters emblazoned on the back. FBI Robert Stone had made the call hours ago while I was driving through the night, coordinating with the agents who had been building a case against Hunter for months. My testimony was just the final nail in the coffin. Special Agent Ramirez marched down the aisle, ignoring the protests of the bailiffs who were still holding Hunter down. Hunter Real Estate Holdings is a front for laundering cartel money, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a siren. Mr. Hunter, you are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit capital murder regarding the attempted vehicular homicide of Luther Banks. Hunter went limp, the fight draining out of him as the realization hit. He wasn't going to a hospital. He wasn't going to get his transplant. He was going to a federal medical facility where he would be just a number dying in a cage. Tanisha tried to blend into the crowd, trying to sneak toward the exit, but Ramirez pointed a finger at her. Take her too. 2 agents grabbed Tanisha by the arms. Federal fraud, she screamed, kicking and biting. I did nothing wrong. I am a mother. You cannot do this to me. Ramirez leaned in close. Mrs. Banks, we have 15 years of cash checks with your signature on them, and we have the testimony of a social worker who says you bribed her to hide your abandonment. You are looking at 20 years minimum. I watched them being dragged out, the diamond earrings Tanisha wore flashing under the courtroom lights one last time before disappearing into the hallway. It was a pathetic end to a pathetic masquerade. Judge Vance tried to regain control, banging his gavel, demanding order, but Ramirez turned to him. Your Honor, we have a warrant for your financial records as well regarding kickbacks from Hunter development projects. Please step down from the bench. The judge's face turned the color of ash. He dropped the gavel as if it were hot and slumped in his chair, knowing his career was over. The system they had weaponized against me had turned on them, eating its own. I looked at Robert Stone, who winked at me slowly, packing his briefcase. The war was over and the good guys had won, but there was still one more truth to tell, one more secret to unbury. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun, the air tasting sweeter than it ever had before. Jordan and Aaliyah walked on either side of me, holding me up, not because I was weak, but because they wanted to be close. We sat on a bench in the park across the street watching the news vans pack up and leave, and for the first time in days we could breathe. Grandpa Jordan said, looking at his sneakers picking at a loose thread on his jeans, "I am sorry. About the house, I know we lost everything. I know we are homeless now, and it is my fault for not protecting it better, but I will get a job. I will drop out of school and work construction. We will figure it out. We can rent a small apartment." I chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that felt good in my chest. "Son," I said, putting an arm around him, "look at me. Do you really think I let them win? Do you really think I played this game without knowing the score? Do you really think we are broke?" Aaliyah looked up, confused, wiping the last of the tears from her face. "But Grandpa, you worked at the factory. You drive that old truck. We ate beans and rice for years. You always said we had to save for a rainy day." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside, tucked behind a picture of Etta, was a card. Not a credit card, but a business card for a patent attorney. "I worked at the factory." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "But I was not just a foreman. I was an engineer at heart. 20 years ago, I invented a valve system for the assembly line that increased efficiency by 40%. The company bought the patent from me for a lump sum plus royalties." Their eyes went wide. "Royalties," Jordan whispered. "Every car that rolled off that line put $5 in my pocket." I explained. "I took that money and I bought land, not just our lot, but the acres surrounding the old industrial park land that nobody wanted back then, but land that is now prime real estate. I did not tell you because I wanted you to know what it means to work. I wanted you to build character, to know the value of a dollar, not just the price of things. I saw what money did to your mother, how it twisted her, how it made her think she was better than everyone else, and I swore I would not let it happen to you. So I lived like a pauper and I saved every dime." "How much?" Aaliyah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The land deal. Hunter was trying to force through," I said. "Looking at the spot where my old truck used to be, his competitors offered me $5 million for it this morning. Cash, $5 million, Jordan choked out. "You are a millionaire." "I am." I nodded. "But I am a millionaire who knows how to fix a leaking pipe and how to cook a stew out of leftovers. And now, so do you. You have the character. Now you can have the comfort. I wanted to make sure you were strong enough to handle the weight of gold without breaking. And after what I saw in that courtroom, after seeing you stand up to monsters, I know you are ready." I sold the land the next day, not to Hunter Shell Company, but to a green energy firm that wanted to build a solar park. They paid top dollar, and they promised to name the park after Etta. It was a fitting tribute to the woman who lit up my life and who died protecting the very future we were now going to live. With the check in hand, I did not buy a mansion. I did not buy a fleet of sports cars. I went to the RV dealership and bought a 40-foot luxury motorhome with 3 slide-outs, a full kitchen, and satellite internet. It was a beast of a vehicle, a land yacht designed for seeing the world on our own terms. Jordan drove the first leg, his eyes bright with excitement as he navigated us out of the city limits, his hands confident on the wheel. Aaliyah sat in the passenger seat, navigating, looking up colleges in California and New York, knowing she could go anywhere she wanted, now knowing she was not a burden, but an heiress who had earned her place. We stopped by the county jail on our way out of town. I did not go inside. I just parked the massive RV in front of the visitor center for a moment, watching the barbed wire fences and the gray walls. Tanisha was in there somewhere, waiting for arraignment, waiting for a life without diamonds, without lies, without the children she threw away. She would have plenty of time to think about the milk she never bought and the father she underestimated. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face, smelling the exhaust and the freedom goodbye. "Tanisha," I whispered, "you wanted to be famous. Well, now you are the most famous inmate in Cell Block C. I hope the suit was worth it." I looked back at my grandkids, Jordan laughing as he figured out the cruise control. Aaliyah singing along to the radio, her smile genuine and bright for the first time in weeks. They were safe, they were loved, and they were free. I cleared my throat, getting their attention. "Listen to me," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Remember this feeling. Remember what we fought for. Family is not blood. Tanisha proved that Hunter proved that family is not about who you share DNA with. It is about who stands next to you when the world is throwing eggs. It is about who sleeps in a truck to watch over you. It is about who breaks you out of a basement family. is the people who never leave. Jordan looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting mine. "We are family, Pops," he said, "forever." "Forever," I agreed. "Put the hammer down, son. Let us go see the ocean." As the RV merged onto the interstate heading west toward the setting sun, I closed my eyes and finally let myself rest. The war was over. The monsters were in cages and the good guys were riding off into the sunset, just like in the movies, only better because this was real, this was earned, and it was ours. Did you like my story? Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of truth and redemption. See you in the next one with love and respect. My journey proves that the strongest bonds aren't forged by DNA, but by loyalty, sacrifice, and the choice to stay when the world turns its back on you. Tanisha and Hunter believed that wealth and status gave them the right to treat people as disposable, but they discovered that true dignity has no price tag. We often underestimate the quiet strength of those who have weathered life's storms, forgetting that a foundation built on lies will always crumble before the truth. In the end, your real legacy isn't the money you hoard, but the people you protect. Family isn't who you are born with. It is who you are willing to die for. If you believe that justice was finally served and that real family is defined by love rather than blood, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors.